Hello there. Coming to you live from the bunker, this is episode 29 of Watchtower in Focus, the show that zooms in on all things JW, bringing the governing body and its teachings and policies under microscopic scrutiny. As is customary, at the end of each year, the team and I have assembled to give you our review of the past 12 months. And with multiple lawsuits, a failed Watchtower petition to the United States Supreme Court, and even a governing body member being caught on camera in a compromising situation, what an eventful few months it has been. Joining me to look back on a remarkable 2019 are my trusty co-hosts, Mark O'Donnell and Covert Fade, and we are joined by a special guest, Camilla Didiner, who is an ex-JW filmmaker. Mark, Covert, and Camilla, thank you for joining me.
Hi, everybody.
Hello. Hi.
Happy to be here.
Well, it's a Christmassy feel here in the bunker, and I would like to just wish you all a very Merry Christmas and Happy New Year, and that extends to all of you who've been patiently waiting on the live chat. Let's see here. Hey Emmy says, Happy New Year in Focus family. Here's hoping your efforts continue to promote positive change for those coming out of the abuse of Watchtower. Well, amen to that. There was okay, so Live Simply says, hello Lloyd, love the work you do and love the accent too. Gosh, well, just wait and see what Camilla has in store for you. She's got a fantastic accent.
No pressure.
Happy New Year from New Hampshire, USA. And Clarity 2 says, Watchtower will continue to spout even worse garbage, caring only for money and keeping up a pretense of still standing as the truth. Well, Clarity has some strong feelings there, which I'm sure we would all emulate. But let's crack on, shall we, with a review of 2019. There's so much to get through. Covert doesn't know this, but he's been planning to read the news. And Covert, before you came on air, Mark and I were talking about the fact that there's been quite a lot happening this year. The only month that I don't have anything for is December. Are you okay doing your news reading thing for when I reach December?
Well, if we must delay my awesomeness until right at the end of the show, that's fair enough. I mean, they say save the best for last, so that's fine with me. I shall bring in the Christmas news.
I should have said, do you mind if we save the best for last? And yeah, sorry, I
am down with that.
Such an ego. It's difficult with all these divas running around here.
And just before we launch into this list, Camilla, you are heading up an exciting film project. What's it been like crowdfunding? Has it been stressful for you?
It has been an absolute roller coaster of incredibly extreme highs with support from people from all over the world that blew my mind, and some very deep, dark lows.
Wow.
on quiet campaign.
Sounds like there's a video there. A Watchtower in Focus episode even. Camilla's deep, dark lows.
No, but do you know what? Overall, it has been an incredibly enriching experience. I learned so much about my own film and about myself as a person, as an ex-JW, as a filmmaker. I could go on and on about and blubber about how grateful I am, but overall, it has been definitely a very unique experience that I'm actually grateful for, with all its challenges. And also 75% of target is not.
I was going to mention that you didn't quite reach your target. Am I to understand? I mean, we'll have a link in the description once this episode is uploaded, is finished. But am I to understand that you're pressing ahead with production regardless?
By all means, yes. I'm at 75% of the target. which allows definitely to start pre-production. And one thing I would say, the campaign I ran is not the all or nothing campaign. It was the one you keep what you get.
Right.
So mercifully, that allows me to start pre-production and hopefully the shoot itself. But I'm still going to continue fundraising to get to that 100%.
And Mark is a little bit too shy to ask you in person, but he has expressed to me that he would like to make a cameo. Clothing optional was what he said to me, but I'll let you guys thrash that out.
I love it. We'll talk about that later.
I will contribute everything I own for Mark to wear clothes.
I love it.
You know, when a program is live, you never know what Lloyd's going to say.
Moving quickly on, just to assist with the mind bleaching that we need to rescue us. So January, what happened in January? Well, a certain book was released, Shepherd the Flock of God. It was the 2019 new 2019 edition, which we've spoken about at length here on the John Cedars channel. Mark assisted me with doing a rebuttal to chapter 14, which dealt with child sex abuse. It was telling, wasn't it, Mark, that whereas in previous editions, child sex abuse has been limited to just a few sections, if at all, in the 2019 edition, they come out with an entire chapter.
So they've not only got an entire chapter on child abuse, they've taken all of their previous policy letters and basically combined them into that chapter in that book, so that this organization, which trades on being God's one true organization, has got to have a manual this thick in order to run its operations. And I think we kind of see the gradual evolution of where the organization is going over a period of time. It's become so laden down with rules and dogma and doctrines and protection of its own assets. Its legal department, which once was very small and virtually non-existent. In fact, during the 40s and 50s, the legal department consisted of Hayden Covington and or Joseph Rutherford up until 1942. And now they've got a pretty massive legal department, and the calls are going out for more attorneys and assistants to help the legal department. So I think it's very telling as to where the organization is right now.
You can see the caliber of Watchtower in Focus viewer when we get this sort of question. Sister Pioneer says, "Hey Lloyd, how about telling us why the new Flock book is copywritten in South Korea?" Right there on the inside cover, not printed, copywritten. I think we touched on this, Mark. It could be for any number of reasons, but it is rather odd, isn't it, that they've it originates from Korea, apparently.
Yeah, and we're going to talk about this a little bit later when we get into some of the subpoenas, the DMCA subpoenas that have been issued by Watchtower since 2017, when they started using this legal tool to go after whistleblowers or anyone who leaked information. But I did notice in going over some of the cases, and including one of the recent subpoenas that was issued September 19th, 2019, that one came from the Watchtower Bible and Tract Society of Korea. And if we need to do a screen share on that later, we can do it. But so I do find it interesting that they're using...
Do you think they're moving their pieces around and being strategic in terms of protecting the organization, perhaps?
I do.
Okay.
I do.
So just rounding off January, because there wasn't that much that happened, but you did touch on this, Mark. Actually, before we move on to that, because I haven't heard much of your reaction, Coverts, to the new Shepherd book, and by all means Camilla as well. I mean, it's a whole new level of, you could say, dystopia when you really do drill down to what's in that book. And obviously we've had previous Shepherd books, and I'm aware of that, but this is arguably the most obvious manifestation of just how authoritarian and rule obsessed the organization is.
Yeah, I mean, one thing that struck me, and it's the same with every Shepherd book, but it's I'd feel a little more charitable to it if a copy of it was issued to every single publisher.
Yeah.
And they could say, we're completely open with the rules. Here are the rules your elders live by. Here's how the organization's run. Here's all our policies in detail. We have nothing to hide. The reality is, as we know, you don't get a copy unless you're an elder. The elders are instructed to keep it away from people. People are not, if you're a Jehovah's Witness, and we know that you are subject to the religious courts of the Watchtower Bible and Tract Society, but you are not entitled to know the rules and the laws by which those courts run. And you're not entitled to know the rights you have in a judicial committee. So one of the things, aside all the other very good points that can be brought out about specifically what's in the Elders book, which is this whole vast other thing, which I know you guys have gone into quite regularly, the simple fact that this is not printed out and handed to every publisher, but rather is kept hidden by the elders, really should be a red flag to anybody that this is not an organization that is open and transparent about the way it does business.
Would you concur with that, Camilla?
Absolutely. One thing that strikes me is really that the book itself is like, it epitomizes just how sinister and cult-like the organization is. I haven't had a chance to familiarize myself with the newest version of it, but I researched and read extensively the previous version when I was doing research for my film. And I remember nearly wanting to throw glasses at the walls with anger at how mind-blowingly cruel those policies were, and the sinisterness, if that's a word, of that, and like Covert said, hiding it from the publishers is something I actually can't get over. In how awful it is, basically.
Well, make sure you have a stiff drink on standby for it when you drill into the latest one. That's all I would say.
I sure will.
Also in January, and this is something that Mark, you've been following probably closest of all of us. On January 24th, Watchtower attorney Paul Polidoro requested sanctions against Facebook for their failure to comply with subpoenas revealing information on people who had been posting information. Watchtower argued copyrighted information on the platform. And this, you could say, really brought to light, or was the beginning of it being brought to light, that Watchtower was pursuing an aggressive subpoena warfare strategy, leveraging copyright law to go after anonymous whistleblowers.
Yeah, I nearly forgot about that one. It seems like
it feels like it was years ago, but it was in fact 2019 when all of this came to light.
It really is. It's crazy. It's when I first saw that. In fact, you just reminded me that we have a Watchtower, a JW Survey article on what Watchtower did, and I just pulled it up now, and it's interesting because I had forgotten.
You wrote it.
I know. I can't keep up. I can't keep up with my own research. I mean, it's coming in. It's like a funnel.
Do we need to get Kimmy to come in and prod you with a stick or something?
Well,
we need you on full cylinders here, Mark.
Yeah. Well, it's become a full-time job. It really has. It's a full-time job, and just the child abuse aspect alone, the stuff is funneling in quicker than I can get it out of the pipeline. But that's going to happen, and we're going to, that's part of the growing pains of our group, our association of people that are working part-time or full-time to expose these things. But the Facebook issue, that was interesting because Paul Polidoro and Phil Brumley and the attorneys at Watchtower actually named Facebook and Mark Zuckerberg as defendants in that, because they very, very aggressively went after Facebook for not complying with their DMCA subpoena. Basically, they were saying, look, if you don't turn over the data that we're demanding, that we've got a court order for from this judge in New York, then we're going to sue you, to the fullest extent of the law. And what ended up happening was, Facebook just they don't have they don't have time to bother with these cases. It was just some crazy miscommunication, and they could care less. And they ended up just complying with the subpoena, and the whole thing kind of went away. But I like the fact that it happened, because it shows just how determined Watchtower is to get its way. When they want information, they will do anything in their power to get it. But when the tables are turned, such as in all the child abuse cases, and when the court demands that they turn over these child abuse files, they do everything possible not to comply with this. Everything possible. So, and maybe we can mention this a little bit later, but I recently discovered in reviewing the Roe versus Doe case, which is something that I haven't written about and not too many people know about, but it's another Irwin Zalkin case in California, which has been going on for 5 years. And this is a case where they've gone after the child molestation files, again, just like they did in Padron and Lopez, in JW versus Watchtower, which we've talked about. But in this particular case, there are 2 victims that are suing Watchtower for their role in covering up this child abuse. And what we've discovered, and what's even happened recently in the past few months, is that Watchtower has aggressively gone after all of the social media accounts of both individuals who are the plaintiffs in this case. And I won't mention their names right now. It's open in court documents, but we generally don't mention victims' names unless they've agreed to go public. But in these cases, these victims, Watchtower has aggressively gone after tens of thousands of pages worth of social media accounts. They've asked for a list of social media platforms from both of the plaintiffs, which I have never seen such a long list of social media platforms. If you want a list of every possible social media, I mean, not just Instagram and Facebook, but there's probably 50 to 100 lists, because they are trying to gather every single piece of evidence that they could use to discredit the child abuse victims in this case. So we're going to be talking more about that, because I know a lot of people are probably saying, what did you just say? What's going on? And there's a lot more to that case that we're going to be talking and writing about. In fact, the trial is scheduled for next June 2020. So
we can maybe talk about that when we're looking forward to...
Yeah.
Because I've got a few notes about 2020, which we will come to. But
Perfect.
yes, January, February was when we started to see this subpoena warfare strategy. When I think of undercover activists who are doing a lot of damage to Watchtower while keeping their identity hidden, one of the names that pops into my head is Covert Fade. Covert, was it concerning for you when you saw this whole subpoena warfare strategy?
It's always unsettling. I think for me personally, I felt slightly less concerned, because I haven't yet personally leaked anything online that is incredibly damaging to Watchtower. I'm more of a commenter. But even so, I was a little bit, wow, that's aggressive. I think the thing that really concerned me is, as you say, it's basically the whistleblowers, I think, who are really going to be online to this. And we know in past there are people who have leaked incredibly damaging information for Watchtower that has been incredibly useful for authorities in holding Watchtower to account. For example, we know that during the Australian Royal Commission, the branch manual ended up in the hands of the Royal Commission, and that was instrumental on getting Jeffrey Jackson on the stand. And we know that other things have been leaked in the past. And it's this determination, almost the spitefulness with which Watchtower goes after people's personal details. I think I've mentioned this before. There's almost 2 sides to Watchtower. There's the side of the organization that most of the publishers see 99% of the time. But then there's the really nasty, vicious, vindictive side, which they very rarely see. But if anytime you see Watchtower operating illegally, like the way they go after, abuse survivors in the courtrooms to try and discredit them. For example, the way some of the things they said about Candace Conti in those trials, and also the thing that Mark's mentioning now, the way they're going after people's social media accounts to try and discredit them. Or the vindictiveness with which they'll go after people like Darkspliver, Darkspilder, which I know that case is still ongoing and might get touched on. But when you look at what that's about, that's an act of pure vindictiveness. That's not an act of genuine copyright. It's that which is unsettling. It shows you the kind of the viciousness that does lurk at the heart of this organization when it thinks its interests are being threatened, or when it thinks that an apostate has got away. And I think that's the other aspect of this, that sometimes you can tell that this is just someone, well, there's someone criticizing us online. We don't know who they are, so we can't disfellowship them. So we need to find out who they are so we can ruin their life. And I think that's the other thing. So for me personally, I didn't feel too worried that they were going to come after me because I'm fairly low profile. And I'm also not personally leaking anything that's damaging to them. But I'm absolutely convinced if I was to ever stick something online and say, hey guys, I've just got this incredibly embarrassing piece of information that Watchtower doesn't want you to know, I am absolutely certain that, Paul Poldero will be locking and loading a subpoena with my name on it. So, yeah.
Paul Polidoro. Yeah, there's a name that we should talk about.
Aside from the, how infuriating it is, the cruelty of that pursuit that we were just talking about, I actually find it fascinating from a sort of an anthropological or psychological perspective at how the people who do this must somehow compartmentalize their belief that they're serving one true God and a God's organization, and that it's all about love and yada, yada, yada. At the same time, they commit such cruel, unthinkable acts towards the former members of their organization, or when we're still talking about undercover apostates, current members of their organization. How do they work with that? How do they look at themselves in the mirror? I just can't understand it, and I find it fascinating in a sort of a sickening way, I have to say.
It is fascinating, and I honestly think that the more activism starts to have a tangible impact on Watchtower, I think the more we're going to see it responding like a caged tiger and lashing out in these very underhanded ways. Moving into February was when we had the release of the notorious May 2019 Watchtower on child sex abuse, which we actually did a Watchtower in Focus episode on. I've also done a standalone video because what was intriguing about that magazine, I don't know whether you guys feel the same, is that what Watchtower did was they took their child sex abuse policy, and rather than necessarily lying about it, they used very, very clever wording to try and sell it to Jehovah's Witnesses while withholding all of the elements where it's obvious that they're putting children in harm's way. Would that be fair?
Evidently.
Evidently. Well, that's what they endeavored to do.
Endeavor, I think, is their favorite word. Yeah, that's interesting. We had a great discussion about that on our program, and that May Watchtower. So that actually came up in a child custody case, and I can't give any details, but a few months ago, I was brought in to testify as an expert witness in a child custody case. And that turned out to be rather interesting because I was asked quite a lot of questions, and I had to produce a lengthy 25-page report about Jehovah's Witnesses. And I tried to be as fair and balanced as possible in doing that. And of course, I did have to mention the child abuse issues and the cover-up, because those issues play a part in whether or not a parent feels that their child is safe in an organization that is known for not reporting child abuse. So in this case, we had a 14-year-old child that was, involved in this custody dispute with her parents, one being a witness and one not. And what came up was that I presented evidence through this report and in my testimony related to that. The opposing attorney, the attorney for the Jehovah's Witness parent, started to question me on Watchtower policy. And what was interesting is I found out through the other attorney that this person, this attorney for the Jehovah's Witness, thought that all of my information was apostate and that none of it came from any reliable sources, and that I had no idea what the actual Watchtower policy was on Jehovah's Witnesses and child protection. So they asked me this in front of the judge during the trial. This is a trial by judge, and there's a lot of people there that are related to this case. And in front of the judge, I was questioned by this attorney for the Jehovah's Witness who said, well, you don't even know the policy of Jehovah's Witness, do you? Can you tell me what the policy is? Have they made any changes and updates? And, so I mentioned, sure, it's on their website. It's their scripturally based position on child protection, which they released on such and such a date earlier this year. And the May 2019 Watchtower, which outlines their position on handling matters involving child abuse. And that shut this woman up immediately because she had been told by the Jehovah's Witness parent that all of my information was apostate and I wouldn't know anything about their actual position. And I think it goes to show how deeply indoctrinated and just how much the average witness thinks that apostates don't have the facts. They don't read JW. In fact, that's what they told this attorney. I don't read jw.org. And I had to have a good laugh at that because that's exactly what we do to get our information accurate.
It was chilling though, wasn't it? Because for the first time you had Watchtower fronting up really about its policy, but it was doing so because obviously they have touched on it. They had the November 2017 JW Broadcasting episode where Gary Bro defended the two-witness rule, but he didn't mention child abuse. So there's been dribs and drabs, but this was the first time in one resource, apart from, you could argue, the scriptural position, which was written for outsiders. This was written for card-carrying members as a defense of their policy. Yeah. And it was chilling to see the disingenuous way in which it was framed.
Yeah, and again, they could have just, if they wanted to be really honest with the rank and file, just give them the Shepherd book.
Yeah, indeed, exactly. Why have all of these different policies? They have one for the media, which is the scriptural position. They have one for the elders, which is the Shepherd book and all the various letters. And they have one for the ordinary rank and file, which is the May 2019. And they're all written in a certain way and all give slightly different versions of the same story. It really is quite chill.
It's a mastery of information control, like in the Byte model by Stephen Hassan.
Very, very true. Very true. Also in February, on February 14th, and this is something that Mark will know very well because he wrote an article on it for JW Survey. On February 14th, apart from it being Valentine's Day, New York Governor Andrew Cuomo signed the Children Act into law. What was the significance of that, Mark?
Yeah, the Child Victims Act. So let's see. I'm actually looking it up now since you're putting me on the spot.
Sorry, I keep forgetting that you forget what you've written on JW.
Well, we really, if no one will ever accuse us of scripting this program.
I'm the same with my book. I have to be prompted sometimes what I wrote in my own book. Yeah. No,
it's okay. We're just going off. We're off script here, which is a good thing because we're not reading from a script. So New York law means justice for all, the Child Victims Act. So that was the February 14th, where the governor signed into law this new law that went into effect in August. And so basically what it meant was that, we have a summary of it on JW Survey. So it provides that the statute of limitations for criminal prosecution of a sexual offense committed against a child shall not begin until the child turns 23 years of age. Civil action for conduct constituting child sexual offense against a child shall be brought before the child turns 55 years of age. Revives previously barred actions related to the sexual abuse of children. That's a big one right there. So without getting into all of these,
are you able to explain the significance of it being New York?
Yeah. So what that means is that not only are New York victims of child abuse able to bring their cases that were previously barred by statute of limitations, and I'm sure most of our listeners understand what that means. There's a certain statute of limitations that if you don't report a crime by a certain time, then there's a limit to when you can report it. So if so many years goes by, and you don't report it, then unfortunately there's nothing they can do criminally, and in many cases civilly. And those are usually different. The criminal statute of limitations are different from civil. So the question is, why is it important in New York? So, well, first of all, this new law allows people a 1-year window who were previously barred from bringing their, let's say, child abuse cases into a civil court and holding either the perpetrator responsible or an organization or religion that covered it up responsible. They have a 1-year window so that they can, from August of 2019 until August of 2020, file their cases in New York. But what that also means, and there are many cases just within the state of New York where the child abuse took place. But what it also means is it opens up the possibility, and remember, I'm not an attorney here, so I'm just telling you what other attorneys have theorized and what they're attempting to do in some of these cases, is to refile cases from other states, such as Oklahoma or California or elsewhere, where the crimes may have happened in other states, but because Watchtower is headquartered in New York, and if they are the defendant in the case, then that opens up the possibility of holding Watchtower civilly responsible, because technically they were the organization that issued the directives to not report child abuse. So, for example, we already know about the Montana case, and that case is being handled in Montana courts because it fell under their statute of limitations civilly, and they were able to file that case. But let's say it hadn't. Well, we have very strong evidence in most of these child abuse cases that Watchtower intentionally directed congregation elders not to report abuse to the authorities because they believe they have clergy confidential privilege, and that all of these conversations between their service department and the local elders in whatever congregation are privileged communications. And because of that, they tell those elders from their legal department and from their service department not to report these cases to the police. And that is why this new law opens up the possibility, and we still have another 7 months to go here. So I think some of the attorneys are waiting to see whether other cases will be filed in a similar manner before they file their cases. And
we are going to come to some of the cases that have already been filed, but I just wanted to make a flag that as being a significant moment, because without that legislation being signed into law, we would be in a different, some of the events that were key to 2019 wouldn't have happened. So from a historical point of view, it was very important. Wild Child Girly says, my children's safety is the biggest reason I wouldn't be a JW ever again. Kingdom halls are not safe places for children. I would not endanger my children by taking them into such a dangerous environment. I can definitely relate to that. And ultimately, Covert, this is what this is all about, isn't it? It's about keeping children safe.
Yeah, that's kind of one of the key critical issues with Jehovah's Witnesses. And I think many of us at various points have said, look, I don't have a problem with someone wanting to believe in a God or something like that. That's not necessarily a problem. The problem comes when there are real world harmful consequences as a direct result of a policy or a belief. And with Jehovah's Witnesses, there are some direct real world consequences. Obviously, the refusal of blood is one of those direct real world consequences. But one of the ones which, ironically, as a JW, I would have never have believed would be one of the biggest is child abuse. Because I remember when I was a JW, we all kind of like scoffed and laughed at the Roman Catholics during their child abuse scandal, because we were like, well, isn't that's one of the worst things you can possibly have as an organization, is covering up child abuse. But yet the reality was that as the Royal Commission brought out, it found that the Jehovah's Witnesses do not produce a safe environment for children, because their ways of dealing with accusations of child abuse they're not just incompetent, they're actively dangerous. And so that's why I think, when you're talking about activism, of course, there's a big part of wanting people to see the truth. There's a big part of not wanting people to see they're being lied to. But a huge part of this is there is an active danger towards, life, liberty, and happiness. And really, the children are the most vulnerable. And an organization which is systematically covering up the abuse of the most vulnerable is an organization that needs to be dragged kicking and screaming into the sunlight, not only to answer for what it's done, but also to ensure that they do not keep endangering children in this way.
Indeed. And Victoria Nomi Predikmas XJW says, hope Owen Zelkin will help the victims the best he can by bringing Watchtower down. They need to apologize to the victims. I think that's what most victims that at least I've spoken to are most keen for, is more than anything just an apology. It's not even necessarily about the payments and the handouts and all that kind of thing, which is so often the accusation, they're just doing this for the money. These are people who have been wronged, and the bare minimum they deserve is for Watchtower to say sorry.
And do you remember how... Oh, sorry, after you.
Sorry. Do you think they ever will apologize?
No. No, because, well, I'd love to say yes, but what's our precedent for Watchtower ever saying sorry about anything? This is an organization with a proud history of never, ever, ever saying sorry, even when their errors are transparent. There used to be the example of a 1980, was it a 1980 Awake article, Mark, where they apologized sort of for 1975. But even that was a bit, I think it was Ray Franz who wrote that.
Yeah.
And even that was a little bit half-hearted. And what they've done since that quote-unquote apology, which was half-hearted to begin with, is they've entirely negated that apology in their subsequent treatment of 1975, including in high production videos, throwing the blame entirely on the rank and file. So even if they did sort of apologize in 1980, they've then completely done a U-turn on it. So no, I think they're incapable of apologizing for anything.
I think because they think they got themselves into a corner that's like some sort of a collective madness, where I think if they do admit that they were wrong and apologize, that removes them from the pedestal of being the God's organization. God's organization makes no mistakes, ergo it doesn't have to apologize. I wonder how long they can keep it up, though.
An apology is not a good look for God's one and only true organization. Lou Knight there, whose avatar continues to impress me, says an apology would be considered a crack in their holier-than-thou armor. And SW says Watchtower will never say sorry, even though they are obviously in the wrong. Yes, Watchtower, in your skirts, the blood of the innocent was found. So we are at the end of February. By the way, viewers, we may have to unceremoniously lose Camilla at some point, because Camilla, I'm aware that you need to leave us in about 20 minutes. So
yes, I have to get back to my family dinner.
We'll let her do all the talking for the next 20 minutes.
Outside of her participation in this episode. So we're glad of... I'm going to try and milk the maximum from you in the remaining 20 minutes.
Okay.
As we move into March. March 10th was more of a big date for me and for the John Cedars channel, because March 10th was when I finally released the Reclaimed Voices documentary. And if you haven't seen that, it's basically the results of a week of filming that I did in October 2018. It's still only sadly received 35 35,000 views. I say only 35,000 views. When you compare that with other videos, that's not a lot. So,
like Pillowgate.
Yeah, Pillowgate was phenomenal. That's over 200,000, at least one of those videos. So if you can watch that documentary, please do. On the 25th of March, this was a key date, and I'm interested to see. I might throw this open to the live chat as well. Why was the 25th of March a date of interest for Watchtower and Jehovah's Witnesses?
You have to give us a hint there, Lloyd.
I mean, no.
Having a Google.
You, of all people, should know. And I'm waiting to see. I'm keeping my beady eye on the live chat to see if someone can outwit my panel. 25th of March, 2019. Why was that a date of significance?
That was the date that the Jim Henson Creature Workshop released the new Stephen Lett.
Close, but wrong. So 25th of March, 2019. Why was it a date of significance?
For us, for Jehovah's Witnesses, for our activism?
For Watchtower, for Jehovah's Witnesses. Okay, I'll throw it open more. For Jehovah's Witness theology.
March is somewhere around the memorial date, but that's all I can think of the top of my head.
Right, so no one's getting it. There's, by the way, 500 now watching live. So thanks to all of you for joining us. So I'm assuming that I don't want to fall prey to doing a David Splain-esque guess what's on my mind thing, because it really irritates me when he does it. So I might as well clue you in. March 25th, 1919 was when Joseph Rutherford and his associates were released from Atlanta Penitentiary. So 100 years on was March 25th, 2019. So 100 years of the faithful slave.
Right, because they were imprisoned, I think, June the year before.
Oh, now he's coming out with all these dates.
You
had it all along.
Yeah.
Well, anyway, I found that interesting. And the 31st of March was even more notorious, you could argue, because on the 31st of March, a member of the faithful slave thought, I'm going to go and buy a whole bunch of whiskey. What's the worst that could happen?
Little did he know.
Tony. If he didn't exist, we'd have to invent him.
Indeed. He's one of those rare exceptions where you could argue that the harm that he's doing is at least partially offset by how outrageous he is as an individual, to the extent where he's surely awakening some people with his outrageous viewpoints and hypocrisy.
That was one article that I actually I had a little fun. I mean, it's not really fun writing about child abuse articles. It really isn't. It's detailing these facts and horrible things. But when I wrote this article, which one friend of mine said it was really kind of a nothing burger, because they're talking about alcohol and Toni Morris and whatever. So he bought a bunch of alcohol. But my opening line to that article was, he wears a crumpled tan trench coat stretched tight against his protruding belly. His blue shirt hangs open at the top, untucked at the bottom. Black pants hang loose all the way down to the ankles, where his feet seem to scream in agony. Dress shoes have been replaced with black flat-bottom slip-on sneakers with white borders. And so he tells our friend who was undercover, he's talking about the Jameson bottles and says, you can't go wrong with that. And I really think that the image of this man really kind of disheveled on a rainy day in a trench coat, and he's fat, and he's the leader of 8 million people. And he's just out buying whiskey on a Sunday when most witnesses are at their meetings, whether he went to a meeting, I don't know, that day. But I really think that it's not a dignified way that you would expect God's anointed representative on earth, the 1/8 of the faithful and discreet slave class, because I know they've changed that doctrine as well, so that the faithful and discreet slave class are the governing body. And here's 1/8 of them in a liquor store on Route 17 in New Jersey buying discounted. Which 2 weeks ago or so,
made a pilgrimage there. I understand.
Well, I went to Warwick with a Norwegian television station who wanted to interview me, and they're following a very interesting story that's going to be coming out in Norwegian, the Norwegian television next year. And so on my way back, I said, I was just driving down Route 17. I said, well, you know, in fact, someone in our group suggested, why don't you stop into Bottle King? And that's what I did. I went into Bottle King, and it was a little creepy. Just, I mean, the place on a Sunday is just mobbed. It's mobbed with people buying discount, you know, liquor and wine and all of this. And I could just see Tony Morris in that same area where I was, just buying a bunch of whiskey. It's just not the dignified way, I think, that most Jehovah's Witnesses, you know, you've got witnesses in Malawi and other countries that don't even make 25 cents a day.
Mm.
And yet, you know, here's this man who is just surrounded by this wealth and this compound built with billions of dollars of donated funds and property sold. It doesn't sit right.
That's the thing, Mark. I mean, it'd be less of an issue if Tony Morris wasn't constantly telling little kids to give up their ice cream money and give it to Watchtower. If that's the big thing. I mean, if this was just some guy who was doing well financially and decided to buy a bunch of whiskey for his collection, that's fine. The issue is, one, this is a guy who would have lambasted anyone for spending that much money on whiskey rather than donating it to the preaching work. He's constantly telling kids to give up their ice cream money and give it to the organization. And there's a very good chance that there, in some congregations, some Jehovah's Witnesses would have been keel-hauled for, you know, potentially setting a bad example by buying that much hooch.
I was just thinking about it, yeah.
Exactly. And Tony Morris has contributed, if you listen to the way he talks, he's not an inverted commas liberal governing body member. He's very dictatorial. He's very narrow-minded, and he absolutely would probably be keel-holding the brother for buying too much scotch. You know, well, brother, are you saying a good? I can't do a good Tony Morris. I'm not drunk
That's
enough
pretty
yet.
good.
But he's just the Tony Morris brought this on himself by being who he is. That's the issue. The issue here is it's Tony Morris doing it, and not just some person who happens to be buying for his whiskey collection.
He also appeared in the August 2019 JW Broadcasting episode, because there was some talk afterwards. Is this going to have an impact? Is he perhaps going to be in trouble with the rest of the governing body? And in August, he was back on JW Broadcasting making a cameo in a morning worship talk. And I know I'm jumping forward in the year, but it was interesting because he was, as far as I'm concerned, properly slurring his speech. And when we worked out when he would have given that morning worship, it would have been significantly before the Bottlegate thing. So again, you can see, you might call it a pattern of behavior that's going completely unchecked because it's a governing body member. It does feel as though it's one rule for him, another rule for others. And also, as you point out, Covert, there's the remarkable hypocrisy of Tony Morris and his chums shaking down kids for their ice cream money while lavishly spending money on very expensive single malt.
Again, it's this fascinating, you know, what is his state of mind really when he doles out those laws the way he does, and at the same time completely has no regard for obeying them himself, or for thinking that, you know, he wants to set up a good example considering his position. I hate to say it, but I'm also fascinated as much as it's awful.
I shudder to think what his state of mind is.
I shudder to think what his state of liver is.
Oh, good grief. Yeah, crumbs. He's on the last legs there, surely. Now, we must, again, mindful that we're into the 9 minutes left of Camilla. There is something that it would be worthwhile getting your input on, Camilla, while you're here. And for this, I need to set up a screen share. So bear with me a moment, guys, as I bring up something that happened in April. So on April 9th, Let me see here.
It's the 100th anniversary of something.
No. There's no more tests like that. Or is there? Okay. Let me see. I had it all ready just a moment ago.
Well, we'll just talk amongst ourselves.
Yeah, you just make.
What is the name of your cat, Mark?
Let's see. Well, behind me in the black chair, that's Patches, and it looks like she just heard you call her, and she's coming to. She is coming to say hello right now. This is little Patches.
Mark's cats are finally getting the attention they've been craving episode after episode.
Looking to the camera. She's had 10 kittens, and we found her outside. There we go.
Oh, wow.
So yeah, this was what I wanted to share with you guys. So this was on actually this was on May the 2nd. So I've jumped forward to May, unfortunately, but this was when ICSA announced a new investigation into child protection in religious organizations and settings. And if we scroll down, we see that organizations falling under the remit of this investigation will include nonconformist Christian denominations, the Jehovah's Witnesses, and then a bunch of other religions. So I think this was a fairly big deal, and because you could argue that although ICSA doesn't have the same funding perhaps as the Australian Royal Commission had, it's not quite on the same level in terms of how much preparation they've been doing. It is nevertheless, we spoke before about the need to hold Watchtower accountable for what they're doing, and here, at least for England and Wales, the organisation is going to have to answer in front of an inquiry as to its child sex abuse policies.
Is that inquiry, bear with me, Lloyd, I'm not overly familiar with it, but is that inquiry in the UK going to be also public the way the Australian one was?
Indeed it is. So I've just realised that the Watchtower in Focus logo is entirely obscuring me, but maybe that's a good thing. So no, it is. So it's going to be actually live streamed. You will be able to watch the inquiry when the public hearings are in progress. The public hearings are going to begin on March the 16th, and they're going to go through to March the 27th. However, obviously this is for a number of religions, not just for Jehovah's Witnesses. So we don't yet know what date or dates Jehovah's Witnesses will be considered on. But nevertheless, this was good news. And just tying in what we were saying earlier about the May 2019 Watchtower article, what was interesting for me was that when they had a preliminary hearing in July, there was a Watchtower representative in London, and he was given about 5 minutes at the end of the preliminary hearing. Bear in mind again that there were lots of religions involved. So right towards the end, they squeezed in this Watchtower representative for CCJW, Christian Congregation of Jehovah's Witnesses, who I'm a core participant, CCJW are a core participant, and there's another group of core participants who are advocates and survivors. So there's 3 in total. And this CCJW lawyer got up, and one of his main things that he needed to say at this preliminary hearing was, oh, we're so transparent about our child sex abuse policy. In fact, we just published a Watchtower about it, the March 2019 magazine, and I've had to tell ICSA actually he meant the May 2019. But they seem proud of it, and I am really looking forward to getting my teeth into that particular Watchtower, because although Watchtower is proud of the magazine, which they're bound to be because they're deluded, there's actually a lot of evidence in there. If you know where to look and if you know how to read the language, confirming our fears about the organization.
What saddens me, though, I think, even though, we get excited about that inquiry, it's going to be public, it's going to get a lot of attention to like the eyes of the world, if you will, towards that problem within the Jehovah's Witnesses community. But at the same time, I'm also painfully aware that the majority of active Jehovah's Witnesses will not go near that inquiry. They won't watch it, they won't listen to it or read about it. So as wonderful as it is to see it happen, I can't help but just feel like it's depressing that the information control blocks the people who need to hear it most from hearing it.
I'm intrigued to see what happens, because actually Mark and I visited Australia in June, and we spoke to a number of ex-Jehovah's Witnesses in Australia, and what we found was that in the wake of the Australian Royal Commission, although there was a lot of denialism on the part of Australian JWs, with some even thinking that Watchtower had done well in the ARC, there were nevertheless, I think it's fair to say, a number of ex-JWs for whom the ARC was instrumental in their waking up process. So although, yes, there's going to be a lot of JWs keeping their heads in the sand, both in the UK and outside the UK, there's nevertheless bound to be at least some who think, hang on a minute, this is the UK government. I want to hear how the organization represents itself and what they have to say on this. So it'll be interesting to see what effect it has long term.
Definitely.
I am, however, mindful that we are on the hour mark, so we need to bid a fond farewell to Camilla. Once again, there will be a link in the description once this is all uploaded and everything. So please do check out that link if you've not yet had opportunity to support her wonderful debutante film project. But Camilla, thank you so much for joining us.
Lloyd, Mark and Covert, thank you so much. It has been such a pleasure to participate in this, and thank you again for the plug.
No problem.
Have a happy new year.
You too. Have a great time with your family. I know you with family and friends, so have a good time.
Thanks a million. Bye.
And say hi to Bubbles.
Oh, Bubbles, I will. Thank you.
Happy
Bye.
New Year.
To you too.
Okay, and as we say goodbye to Camilla, I must read a super chat. This is, thank you very much indeed, Skeptics Propaganda, for your generous support of the John Cedars channel. Having stayed at Bethel for several years, I'm glad that Watchtower doesn't have any more power than they already have. A world with only Jehovah's Witnesses would be a nightmare. I'm glad there are people courteous enough to expose them for who they are. Thanks. Well, thank you, Skeptics, and thank you for your kind support of the channel. And I consider myself very fortunate to have colleagues like Mark and Covert and everyone else on the JW Survey team, including those I'm working with on the Truth About the Truth project. It really is a team effort, and we're really feeling the love and support from our viewers. So thank you for that. Moving on through the year, so I missed April 9th. We need to go back from May to April 9th, because that was when Watchtower responded to the EFF's motion to quash. Over to you, Mark.
Sure, let me just rattle off all the dates and times. And
you don't have to rattle off all the dates and times. Just spell out for us, or maybe Covert can do this. Covert actually mentioned the Dark Spilver case, so maybe we can just give the briefest of summaries as to what the Dark.
We have done an episode on Dark Spilvers. I think we're all familiar with the case, but Covert by all means.
Okay, so to kind of I mean, essentially, Dark Spilver is a Reddit user whose identity is unknown. And all he did, he posted some Watchtower material to Reddit. And for an example, one of them was basically just an example of a Watchtower flyer that was inviting people. I think, was it to the memorial? I'm a little sketchy on the dates now, but it had something. He was basically drawing attention to something in the flyer that he thought was ironic. You know,
you mean the one-page ad?
Yeah. The one-page ad that was in the Watchtower. And he made a passing comment on on what he thought of that in the context of the JW religion overall. Pretty innocuous, kind of one of the most obvious examples of fair use I've ever seen. Watchtower decided to sue him for copyright violation. And what becomes completely apparent as you look into this case is that Watchtower has no interest in copyright. Watchtower wants to know who Darkspilver is so that it can religiously discipline Darkspilver. And there's actually been one of the really interesting things about this is, as a copyright lawyer, Leonard J. French, who's been doing a YouTube series, it caught his attention as this was going on. He kind of like comments on various copyright issues.
He's actually covered it more than we have, hasn't he? He's been really interested in what's going on. Yeah.
Well, it's been quite cool because I think we've all looked at his YouTube and gone, basically, he's kind of covered everything we'd say and more.
Over to you, Leonard. You know what you're talking about.
Exactly. Shout out to Leonard. But what's become increasingly clear is that Watchtower just wants Darkspilver's identity so that they can punish him. And Watchtower's arguments, they have yet to rule, I believe, definitively on what will happen to Darkspilver, whether or not his identity will be turned over. But if you look at the case, there's no way in which Watchtower's he published Watchtower's advert. So Watchtower is saying that by circulating our promotional advert, you're harming our copyright. Really? So how is me circulating your advert harming you, since it's an advert for you and he didn't even alter it? So it's like, and then him passing a comment on what he thinks of it, which is the most obvious fair use example of religious, of fair use I've ever seen. But anyway, that's what's basically going on. And as we come back to really the key point of this is Watchtower, and as we've said before in this 2019, continuing its campaign of subpoena warfare, of trying to track down its critics. And this is actually really nasty, because this is an example of them just going after a critic simply because he's a critic. This has got nothing to do with them having a legitimate copyright complaint. They want his identity so that they can punish him. And again, this is the kind of thing where even though I'm fairly confident Watchtower isn't going to come after me anytime soon, just because I haven't done anything too much to annoy them yet, it does remind me that I can't completely count on that, because they might just be vindictive enough to subpoena Twitter for my real identity, because hey, they've done it to Darkspilver on Reddit. So yeah,
indeed.
Well, and I don't want to disagree with you regarding their reason for wanting to discipline this Darkspilver person if they get the opportunity to do so. But I will say there's something even more sinister that lies beneath this, and it's a common thread in all of the cases. So right now, in fact, you can jump over to the Avoid JW website, and there's an article in there called Philip Brumley Witch Hunter. And what this is a list with all of the documents. You can download and read every single document from the past 3 years of Watchtower going after people who leak information or publish information that they claim they have a copyright claim to. And right now we're up to 59 on that list that's been posted and published. And of course, these are publicly available documents you can purchase through the online Pacer system. So, but in the Darkspilver case is very interesting, because like other cases, what's really going on here is that they're taking a person who has published thousands of things. This Darkspilver person published thousands of things on Reddit over the course of a couple of years. And this caught Watchtower's attention. And one of the reasons it caught their attention was because one of the documents that he or she published was a sensitive document not published on Watchtower's website. It was a spreadsheet that had some private sensitive information, or at least they're saying it's sensitive and it's their copyrighted. What they are doing is they are going after anyone that they believe is a source of leaked information. They are trying to forensically identify anyone who may be at the root of these leaks that have been coming out, particularly since 2017, when they started this all off by going after JW Survey. They went after Avoid JW and several others that they suspected of being the leak sources. So they're trying to flush out all of these individuals to see who they are, who the key players are. So, for example, they don't really care about that ad. It was the back page of a Watchtower. what they're doing is taking the collective evidence that they can find and going to the courts and saying, here's our proof that this person is violating our copyright. But what they're really doing is they're saying, look, we want to get the person or persons who are behind these leaks, and we're going to use A, B, C, D as pieces of evidence to prove that they are to flush out their name, to prove that they're at the root of the leaks. They just want to identify where these leaks are coming from. And I just think that, it's like a cat chasing their tail, because the leaks are coming from everywhere. They're coming from elders, circuit overseers, from just so many different places. You can't keep up with these leaks.
In terms of the Dark Spilver case, is it still unresolved?
Correct.
Okay.
So it's in the hands of the California judge, and I usually check that daily. And right now, they have not issued a ruling on that yet.
Okay. Well, once we have some kind of resolution on that, we'll revisit it for Watchtower in Focus and maybe get Leonard back on the channel. Yeah. While I'm moving back up my list, there's actually one other thing I forgot to mention from February. February 20th was when we learned we had the first reports through of Jehovah's Witnesses in Russia being tortured, including by being tasered. So we didn't cover that on Watchtower in Focus, but I did cover it on the channel. Very, very disturbing news there. Whatever you think about Jehovah's Witnesses as an organization, surely we can all draw the line at not torturing individual members who are already victimized because they've wound up in a cult.
Look, we were all there once, right?
Indeed. Indeed.
We've all got family or friends. We were in the organization, and we certainly at some point in our lives would have said, yes, I will stand up for my faith, what I believe in. And we would, in my case, I remember risking being arrested by the Egyptian border police when we smuggled a large amount of literature from Israel across the Rafah border into Egypt. I believe
Steven Spielberg is trying to purchase the film rights for that particular story, Mark, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, sure, we but it happens all the time.
Yeah,
we smuggled a lot of literature and met an elder in secret in a hotel, and the whole thing is, we could have. I was probably 19 or 20 years old at the time. I could have been arrested, and we were doing something very illegal. And this is something I think the public needs to understand, that Jehovah's Witnesses are very willing to do something illegal or to lie in order to accomplish what they believe is Jehovah's will, God's law. And that's where they draw the line. If it's God's will, they will lie.
Obeying Watchtower comes first, personal well-being comes second. Moving forward to May the 13th, the following letter was congregations in Britain and Ireland, and I think all over Europe. Maybe those of you on the live chat can confirm, or maybe you can confirm, Mark, is this also in America that they changed the rules?
Well, no, because...
Go on.
Sorry. Yeah, we don't have the GDPR in the United States. That only applies as I understand it, in the European Union. So this letter went out to all of those countries which were affected by the new GDPR law that went into effect.
So does that mean that in the US, when a Jehovah's Witness calls on someone, they're still disappearing around the corner and writing voluminous notes about what their cat's called and what they do for work and that kind of thing?
Yeah, I think they're a little more subtle about it now, but they don't have the same GDPR regulation that we have here, so they still collect data. I think the organization knows it's coming in some form, but it's nowhere near what happened over in Europe. Because I think it's a lot more progressive. The European nations are so much more progressive when it comes to protecting data. We still have examples here in the United States where elders are collecting medical data, for example, and you could never do that in Europe. But they would collect, for example, the hospital, blood cards or blood documents related to the patient's desire to avoid blood transfusions.
Sure. So nevertheless significant, Covert, because it was a big part of our time in the preaching work was, again, writing these notes and keeping not homes was big, because obviously we needed to cover the territory thoroughly, or so we thought. So we needed to write down any homes that we'd missed, and if we met someone who showed even the slightest interest, we had to write a mini essay on them. And then May 13th, this letter goes round saying, accordingly, publishers should not collect personal data in connection with the field ministry. Surely a big thing.
Yeah, that's a little end of an era, really. I mean, I think, as has been pointed out, this is going to have two very interesting knock-on effects going forward. One, it's another nail in the coffin of the door-to-door preaching work, which is already yielding increasingly diminished results. Well, now it's becoming increasingly hard for Jehovah's Witnesses to pass information around. It's becoming harder for them to store information on the people they've called on. And I remember as a JW, I very rarely did my return visits at the best of times. And if I wasn't able to even write anything down about the householder, I'm fairly certain I would have done even fewer. So I think it's basically hamstringing the preaching work even further, which is a good thing because it's potentially saving people from being recruited. But the other thing is we're going to start seeing how wedded the organization is to keeping obsessive data files on all of its members. Indeed. Because it's not just the preaching work. This is going to impact.
Just the tip of the iceberg.
Oh, yeah.
Lou Knight there saying, yes, Lloyd, in the US, your personal data is protected in some middle-aged single woman's Barbie notebook. So there we go.
There it is.
Confirmation on the ground there from
I'm
Lou
sorry.
Knight.
I just want to shout out that avatar that Lou Knight is rocking. That is awesome.
It is a thing of beauty. I wouldn't mind having that framed on the bunker wall, if I'm honest. Nudge, nudge, wink, wink. So, also, while I have the screen share up, we need to talk about these May announcements and reminders, which included changes to the baptism questions. I actually covered these, and I don't know, Mark, I did a video on it, and they weren't massive changes. Would it be fair to say?
No, I think we've already had the big change several years ago when they added the term Jehovah's Organization. So we still have that number 2, which says, do you understand that your baptism identifies you as one of Jehovah's Witnesses in association with Jehovah's Organization? And, I can tell you that this is something that legal authorities, there's some criminal investigations going on now that I can't really comment a whole lot on, but I know that they're very concerned with the fact that this Jehovah's Organization represents a parallel judicial system in which they are taking the place of legitimate legal entities and processing, for example, child abuse cases and other matters by using their own internal judicial process. And here you have a statement where every Jehovah's Witness, and by the way, the kids are getting baptized at 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 years of age. They cannot answer these questions. These are just the 2 questions. For anybody that's watching that doesn't know how Jehovah's Witnesses operate, you have about 180 questions that the elders go over with you in 3 stages with 3 different elders normally prior to getting baptized. But on the day of your baptism, you're at an assembly, there's a swimming pool or a baptismal font, and a Jehovah's Witness elder gives a speech called the baptism talk. And at the end of that talk, all the baptismal candidates stand up and they answer these 2 questions by verbally saying yes at the end, and then they go and get baptized in the traditional way. So these 2 questions, they have to answer yes to. But I would argue that at age 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, they don't fully understand, or even at age 17, they can't answer these questions in the same way an adult could say, yes, I understand that this baptism identifies me in association with Jehovah's organization. Those kids don't really know what Jehovah's organization means because they don't have access to, they don't know that they'll go through a severe judicial process if they break any of the laws. If they have a girlfriend and have sex, or a boyfriend, or they smoke a cigarette, or they don't understand fully how all of this takes place because there's no transparency. And honestly, there can't be transparency with children. They're children and they're getting baptized. So I'm not sure what Covert thinks about the questions or the changes, but
perhaps it would be helpful to know what the original questions were, just because I said there's not a huge difference. Yeah. So question 1 used to say, on the basis of the sacrifice of Jesus Christ, have you repented of your sins and dedicated yourself to Jehovah to do his will? And instead they now say, and dedicated yourself to Jehovah and accepted his way of salvation through Jesus Christ. So they just switch things around a bit. And the question 2 used to say, do you understand that your dedication and baptism identify you as one of Jehovah's Witnesses in association with God's Spirit-directed organization? A few people at the time suggesting that losing Spirit-directed from the question was some kind of admission that the organization isn't Spirit-directed. I would argue that it's just word economy, personally.
Yeah, they don't do anything without a reason. And
come on, Mark. they're not suddenly saying, "Oh, we're not Spirit directed anymore."
No, of course not. No, I agree with you on that, Lloyd. I'm just saying that I can imagine. I would love to be a fly on the wall with these meetings where they say, "Hey guys, it's time to revise the baptism questions, and here's why. We're concerned about A, B, C, D, and E." I don't know what Covert thinks about that.
Yeah, that's the. I mean, firstly, I agree that the idea that a child will be locked into, you don't let a child make any other decision that will affect the rest of their life like that. So the idea that they can take this baptism at that age is ridiculous. But yeah, I wonder sometimes if they just get bored. There is an aspect of me that wonders, because sometimes at Bethel, I wonder if you see these shuffles because they just got bored. And some Bethelites like, we haven't done this for a while. Can I do? Yeah, go on then.
Maybe it's like a Wheel of Fortune thing in the governing body's conference room, and it's like, we don't have anything to talk about. Let's do the Wheel of Fortune, and it clicks into place on change the baptism question.
It's like after the 12th bottle of Macallan, they're like, Spanner is fine. It's his baptism questions. We're doing that. We're doing that. Yeah.
Oh dear. So anyway, let us know your thoughts, viewers. There's currently 580 watching this review of 2019. We're almost halfway through, and we're making headway. And May was also the last thing I've written down for May. May was the beginning of a convention series of conventions under the not remotely ironic theme of Love Never Fails. So that's when the conventions began in May.
Asterisk.
Yeah.
See footnote.
I can't see that title without seeing Love Never Shuns. I think that was just
that was a good spin.
Brilliant spin on that. Yeah.
So yeah, look, I obviously did a series of rebuttals on the Love Never Fails convention. I have to be completely honest and say, compared to other conventions, especially the 2016 convention, it wasn't really terrible. I mean, the worst part for me was unquestionably the Josiah drama. The Josiah drama was seriously messed up. It was the governing body vicariously living this fantasy of slaughtering people who don't follow them, basically through the story of Josiah and his jihad. But apart from that, apart from one or two really awful videos, it really was relatively tame. That was my take on things. I don't know whether you guys agree.
I think they project themselves into the position of Josiah, because that's a very important metaphor, I guess, for an organization opening the scrolls and explaining them to the followers, because the story of Josiah has to do with, he was a young boy, and he found the scrolls, and Israel had gone astray, and they weren't reading the scrolls, and everything was gone to haywire, and the land of Israel was committing all these sins. And so Josiah decides, as king, he opens the scrolls one day and he says, "Oh, we're doing everything wrong." So then he corrects things, and everything is happy.
You'll never guess what we've found during temple renovations. It's Deuteronomy.
Right. And I think that's sort of the metaphor for the governing body, that they want witnesses to see the governing body as the guardians of the doctrine, which is what Jeffrey Jackson called himself and the governing body. He said, "We are the guardians of the doctrine." So they view themselves as someone that can open the scrolls, open the Bible, and explain it in only a way that they can, because they are spirit directed.
Indeed. Now, we've had a nice, an incredibly generous super chat from Josh Wilkes, who says, "Thanks for all you do, Lloyd. Love Covert Fade's perspective on everything JW related. Aww. We won't read anything into the fact that you've snubbed Mark in that comment, and we will thank you very much for your generous."
I agree with him.
Oh, thank you, Josh.
We love our Covert Fade, and Mark, frankly, is part of the furniture here. Covert has a very active, and you could say risk-intensive life as an operative in various parts of the world, which is why he can't be on every single episode. So whenever we can get him on Watchtower in Focus, we try to make the most of his presence.
007.
00 Covert. So moving on to June. And June, this is again where I need to grapple with the screen share, the dreaded screen share, to share with you an interesting... here we are. So this was an interesting magazine that popped up in... Let me see if I can bring it up. There we go.
Now, can't you just get R2? June, can't you just get R2 to project that?
R2 is incredibly lazy when it comes to the actual nuts and bolts of making these videos. He springs to life when the camera isn't on, unfortunately. But June 2019 was when we had this quite remarkable October 2019 Watchtower article come out featuring Kenny Rogers, I mean Jesus, riding to battle against Satan's hordes on horses. Don't ask me where these horses come from, these giant heavenly horses, flanked by anointed, all with beards, because as we know, women can't be anointed, or women can be anointed, but when they go to heaven, they also have beards. And they're charging into battle to slay these soldiers who are, as we can see there, ganging up on Jehovah's Witnesses. So quite astonishing artwork there.
Yeah, and it's kind of lying as well, because if this wanted to be completely honest, these wouldn't be soldiers in body armor with M4 assault rifles. These would be unarmed men, women, and children that the governing body are cheerfully riding down with Kenny Loggins riding into the danger zone. Yeah, but I have noticed that there's a real trend now. They seem to be moving away from portraying Armageddon with innocent civilians being killed, and they seem to be really focusing on it being armed soldiers. And I feel that's deliberate. I don't know what you guys think.
I think we saw the same thing in 2018, didn't we? When the what was it called now? Oh, help me out here, Mark. The new prophecy book, the Divine Purpose book, or Jehovah's Purpose, or whatever. The new book that they released at the annual meeting.
The God's Kingdom book.
No. Hang on.
You
had the artwork on your Twitter for ages, Covert.
Yeah, it's got the best heavy metal cover that Watchtower have ever done. Yeah.
And it was some really quite astonishing artwork that really revels in this concept of witnesses. They had the bank of monitors and the situation room at the Pentagon or something. Yeah. with Samuel Hurd on one of the monitors. It was really grotesquely self-indulgent stuff that they were, that, you know, they really fantasize about being the center of attention, you know, when the Great Tribulation strikes. And so it's continuing really that genre of really messed up artwork, which I don't think is going to age very well.
I have to say that, you know, we're seeing more and more of this sophisticated, at least they think it's sophisticated artwork, where you have this angelic protection surrounding Jehovah's people. And you have, you know, these evil forces that are maybe going like the ones here in your image. But there's other ones. I remember seeing one where you have, you know, a family in a house, and they show a cutaway of a house. And, you know, you have, I think there's some people approaching the house, maybe with guns, and you have the angels surrounding it. And I can't help but think that the whole concept that the angels are, and there's billions or an unlimited number of Jehovah's angels that are looking down and protecting his righteous people. And I think of all of the children that have been abused, not just by outsiders or not just by rank and file witnesses, but think of all those children that were sexually molested by Roderick Watkins while he was an elder. And while he was being moved from congregation to congregation, from North Carolina to Bethel as a Bethelite, serving as a waiter, and he ends up getting kicked out of Bethel, winds up in Missouri and Illinois, you know, where he's drugging and raping Jehovah's Witness children under the Pioneer Assist program, where he is manipulating these children to be with him and study the Bible with him, when in fact he is drugging and raping them. And then he moves in the year 2000 to Arkansas and starts doing it all over again with children that haven't at that time even been born yet when he arrives, until he's finally arrested because the Arkansas detective studied in this case and arrested this man. This is why I think it's one of the most profound reasons why anyone can understand that there is no God or angels that are protecting Jehovah's Witness children from these child molesters. And this is a farce to think that this protection exists, because it doesn't. We have case after case after case proving that these children are not protected, not even to mention their policies. And I hate to go on a, you know, another rant about child abuse, but obviously it's one of our core topics. And when you show these pictures about Jehovah's protection or the armies coming down and, you know, while they're protecting against men with guns, Lloyd, it just, you know, I think it angers a lot of people. And by the way, it angers a lot of witnesses who are now finding out about men like Roderick Watkins and the fact that Watchtower knew about it and covered it up.
Mark, I owe you £10 because, and I feel really guilty because Josh Wilkes has now sent in another super chat saying, sorry, Mark. So I don't know what to do about that, but
he has nothing to apologize Josh. For.
And I owe Mark a pint, it seems. And we have had another super chat through. I'm sure there's no coincidence about the donation amount from Nick King, who says, although I escaped years before you all started this wonderful work, I'm still hopeful that some of my family and former friends benefit from your work. Thank you all. From, is that Virginia, USA? Yes. I'm trying to remember my abbreviations. So
Virginia.
Thank you so much indeed, Nick.
Thank you, Nick.
Now, let's crack on. The one more thing I wanted to mention in June before we move into the second half of the year was that Mark and I, again, were in Australia, and we were fortunate enough to attend the largest gathering, I think, of ex-Jehovah's Witnesses in Australia, certainly to that point at least. But there was a good crowd there. We live streamed the event on the 22nd of June. And what I really liked, Mark, was the theme of the event was better, not bitter. And I think that encompasses a really good attitude to have as ex-JWs. We're going to keep the high ground. We're not going to descend into bitterness. We're going to show that we're better by staying on message, not getting too carried away with bitterness and hatred, and just being fair and being kind.
Yeah, that event is really special. And I think those that had a chance to watch the live stream, and I think you still have it up on your channel.
Yeah.
Look, it's obviously better than any Jehovah's Witness event, because we're going to have disagreements with one another from time to time. We work in a kind of a close-knit ex-Jehovah's Witness community, and we're not going to agree on everything. But that's the beauty of it, is that you can go into a group like that where we had 120 or 30 or however many people it was, I forget, but it was a lot of people, and everyone there was just polite and responsive and nice. And I mean, it was just a genuinely good feeling of being around non-judgmental people. These are people who chose to go their own way in life, whether they chose to get married, not get married, maybe they're gay, maybe they're not. But none of us judge each other anymore for any of those things. We judge based on our own conscience and the law and what is right, and not based on what 8 men in New York have written down in the Shepherd the Flock of God manual as their interpretation of the Bible. And I think you pointed it out very well, Lloyd, when you gave your speech at the event, that I think you asked for a raising of the hands of people there that were still religiously inclined or believe in God. And not all ex-Jehovah's Witnesses become atheists. Many have faith in God or a religious structure to their life, and many don't. And we don't go up to them and question them. Do you believe in God? Do you not believe in God? We don't care. What we care about is that they have freedom of speech, freedom of their life, freedom to do good things, to help others, and to help, within our own community, to help each other. And that is a great feeling of liberation that you will not ever get within the Jehovah's Witness organization. It was a great event.
720 Red Dog saying better, not bitter. Is that 100% for sure? So thank you very much, 720 Red Dog. Now we move into July, when pictures emerged of Samuel Hurd, governing body member, dancing in Brazil. Does anyone remember that?
I was getting a lot of those pictures sent to me live or moments after.
Because everyone knows that you are famous for your dancing, Mark. People immediately made that link and thought, we need to get Mark's input on this. Is it good dancing?
Unfamous for my dancing, very unfamous for that. But we have, the beauty of this is that we have sources in virtually every country of the world. And I will say this, Jehovah's Witnesses are very big in Brazil. It's one of the largest branches with several 100,000 Jehovah's Witnesses. And they brought in Samuel Hurd, and I think we saw Gary Bro in there. And these
what was interesting more than the dancing was, the dancing was interesting because I had people criticizing me when I made the video. I called it Dancing for Jehovah, and I had Jehovah's Witnesses jumping on saying, are you saying that there's something wrong with dancing? And I was saying, no, what I'm saying is dancing is perfectly normal, but why do Jehovah's Witnesses only get to let their hair down at these events that are basically for international convention delegates? Why don't they get to do that all the time and act in that way all the time? And you could say that the veneration of Samuel Hurd and Gary Bro was grating more than anything in that.
Yeah, you kind of have this, and we're starting to see this more and more now with the current governing body. As we've said many times, when we were young JWs, it was almost a point of pride that we didn't know who the governing body were. But now, since JW Broadcasting especially, they've all started to become little celebrities, and you see people having their selfies taken with Stephen Ladd. And it's clear, I think it's clear that it's going to their heads a little bit, for some of them anyway. I don't think the current members of the governing body, I suspect many of them don't have the self-awareness for it not to go to their heads. And I think we're going to continue to see an interesting evolution of who the governing body are. I think you might start getting a little cult of personality around some of them. It's like you can tell some of them, like Anthony Morris, he absolutely laps it up. And you might also start to get some members of the governing body maybe retiring from the limelight a little bit if they really don't like that. Because I can see that there are some maybe or maybe not maybe governing body helpers who are like, they're there because they genuinely believe it, but they actually feel uncomfortable with the limelight. So it might be interesting to see as we go forward which ones end up on which selfies and which ones tend to stay away from it.
So we've had a couple of super chats come through. Whatever says, first contribution, but a year watching your channel and being free. Thanks, Lloyd from Cornwall, UK. I think it's safe to say that Cornwall is my favourite part of the UK. It's a beautiful part of England. So thank you so much for those kind words, and thank you for the super chat. That's wonderful. Leah not Remini. Thank you for distinguishing there. Says better, not bitter. Could not agree with you more. And Jason N says after they discontinued the food service, they still had frozen yogurt for a few years at the Puyallup Assembly Hall. Clearly, Jason is displeased with the food arrangements at current assembly.
Well, he's right. They did continue that
absolutely right
on a donation basis when they migrated from selling literature. They also had to stop selling food for the same reason,
and it's something that Mark gets very emotional about. So I'd rather we don't dwell on that too much.
We had a great frozen yogurt machine in Crownsville, Maryland. Everybody loved that, but it's gone.
Josh Wilkes is back with another very generous super chat saying, biggest reason that I left the organization, the Bible says, be careful, do not go beyond the things that are written. Jehovah's Witnesses go beyond all the time. My family won't accept this. Any suggestions to help them get that? I think, Josh, I mean, I don't know what the guys would say, but in my experience, it's very hard to just thrust information at believing family members. It's one of those things where it has to be their discovery for it to stick. So my advice would just be to just continue being as kind and respectful as possible. They will be interested, presumably, depending on how close they are, in salvaging you. So when they initiate the conversation, just be ready with one or two things that you might be able to say. But yeah, I think it's more about the attitude. If you continue to be kind and respectful, hopefully that will yield some results. I don't know what the guys would say.
Yeah, and Josh, feel free to email us at contact@jwsurvey.org, and we're happy to, when we have a little bit more time to expound on that, we're happy to reply and give you some of our suggestions. But I agree with Lloyd, and I think you don't want to get too confrontational and argumentative with your relatives. You want to find as much common ground as you can, show them that you're, living a good life. And if I don't know what your beliefs are, but you've got to put it in perspective. When you're, for example, if you're an atheist and you're talking to someone who is God believing or religious, then you've got to put things in terms that they will understand and respect, so that you're not attacking their beliefs. So, and there's a lot of ways, there's lots of subjects and ways you can do that, but you don't want to get them on the defensive, because Watchtower, if we've learned nothing else, they've trained all of their members to be defensive. That's the whole purpose of that reasoning book we had for so many years, to whip that book open and say, well, here's what the scripture says. Here's our defense. When in fact, it's just, made up reasonings from the governing body and their associates.
So yeah, Josh, there is actually a support address at JW Survey, same to anyone who is interested in getting some inputs, perhaps as you're having difficulty dealing with family members or with making your transition. We're slowly but surely getting a bit of a support function in place at JW Survey. And to that end, we do have a support email address. So we'd love to hear from you. But thank you again for that very kind super chat. Friend of the channel, Brandon Fiquette. In fact, JW Survey team member because he's on our technical team. Just popping in to say hello, folks. It's been a 2019 for the history books for sure. Here's to hoping 2020 is the year a better humanity emerges and grows out of its infancy. Well, stirring, profound words there from Brandon. You can see that his talents are largely lost on doing the IT. He perhaps needs to be doing more writing. Nudge, nudge, wink, wink there, Brandon. So,
well, I'd like to give a shout out to Brandon and for getting married this year. He's been, I think we've talked about it. You've interviewed Brandon on the channel, and he went through a period where the Watchtower came after him and Yvette and disfellowshipped him for. Well, we won't go into all that. We've discussed that before in your interview with Brandon. But what a change from being disfellowshipped after being hounded by Jehovah's Witness elders he didn't even know to now being just happily married, and his life is in a very good place. So shout out to you, Brandon and Evie.
And it's worth noting as well that since Watchtower in Focus has been broadcasting, when we began doing our episodes, he was a Bethelite, and he actually spent some time, if you can just about see there, between our pictures, you can see the Warwick headquarters. He spent some time at Warwick, and in the space that we've been doing these Watchtower in Focus episodes, he's managed to break free and live a happy, authentic life, and find happiness on the other side. So it is possible, folks, as we, it can be a difficult time of year, time when you're reminded perhaps of how lonely you are, but you really are not alone. People are making it out to the other side, and there is help and support if you look for it. Just one more super chat before we move on. Dark Void Fortress says, my ice cream money is much safer here. Keep up the great work of uncovering and debunking Watchtower in 2020. I'm 5 years free and enjoying life fully thanks to stumbling on this channel. Lovely words there, and congratulations on finding your freedom. So July, before we move on to August, July the 5th, we established, Mark, just before we went on air, was the fateful date when Jehovah's Witnesses, through a proud legacy of pursuing religious liberties through the United States Supreme Court, under the bus by shaming the organization and its history in their petitioning the United States Supreme Court for the quote-unquote right of Jehovah's Witnesses to keep secret records on child abuse. That was July the 5th.
So we have a case that went on for a number of years where a victim of abuse, whose initials are JW, she and her family were very upset that Watchtower had covered up certain documents and had withheld so much information that when they called Watchtower's headquarters and asked for that information, about their own case, they were refused. And the only way that they could get that information was by basically leaving the religion and filing a civil lawsuit against Watchtower for their role in the cover-up of child abuse, in which multiple children were abused on multiple occasions by a man who was for a long time an elder. And so this case was known as JW versus Watchtower. It was in the courts for a number of years. And the big takeaway that I think everyone needs to understand, this is a California case called JW versus Watchtower. And the court, the Superior Court of California, ruled that Watchtower was in default of their orders to produce these child molestation files that were critical to the case. And as a result, they gave the plaintiff, which is JW, what she asked for, which was a fine in excess or a judgment in excess of $4 million, which actually is closer to $6 million with interest, because Watchtower has been paying a bond on it for years now, because they lost the case several years ago. but Watchtower appealed this $4 million default judgment. And remember, a default judgment means the court says, you have been a recalcitrant litigant. That's for you, Covert. You've been a recalcitrant litigant, and you've failed to produce these documents that have been demanded. And so as a result, the judgment in favor of the plaintiff for over $4 million. And then they appealed it. They appealed it again, took it to the highest court, took it to the Supreme Court of California, lost there in, I think that was the end of 2018, just over a year ago. And so Watchtower says, well, we think we can win this in the United States Supreme Court. And so, as you just mentioned, Lloyd, they brought it in the summer of this year, 2019, to the United States Supreme Court. And as we'll discuss, I guess, now we're in a few minutes, the decision was made by the United States Supreme Court to reject Watchtower's appeal. And there are no other courts to appeal to. And that means that Watchtower has had to write that check of between $4 and $6 million to that single victim of child abuse, whose case was just horrifically covered up. And,
but what a way to shame their legacy when you think of I mean, that was arguably one of the rare things that you could point to when it comes to Jehovah's Witnesses and their footprint on history. You could point to the halcyon days of Hayden Covington, when they were knocking through this amazing legislation that gave everybody greater religious liberties. What a way to throw that legacy under the bus in such a shameful way, by purely for their desperation in keeping these child abuse records secret. It's just astonishing.
I don't remember seeing that on jw.org, so it must not be true.
Yeah, indeed. I must be making things up. So thanks so much again for yet more super chats coming through. Joanne says, I'm not going to try and I'm going to massacre your surname, mate. Booze Drunkford was a bad guy. I'm not quite sure who you're talking about there, but I'll take your word for it.
Yeah.
And Wayne Garrison says, I was never part of Jehovah's Witnesses or any similar organization, but I discovered your channel this year through my interest in atheism and anti-cult activism. Lloyd Mark Covert et al. Great work. Looking forward to more in 2020. Thank you so much, Wayne. That's a lovely message, and glad you're enjoying the channel. So moving on to August. August for me was very significant for two reasons. First of all, you had this horrendous JW Broadcasting episode where for the very first time they used this new kind of high production video machinery that they've got in place to promote their blood policy, to the extent of celebrating the death of one young man, Jared Scepter, who would be my age now if he'd been allowed to live. Celebrate his death by bringing his parents on and having them cry about how amazing it was that they had food brought to them while they were killing their child. It was a really disturbing video. I think the most disturbing video that Watchtower has ever made. And the same month, in August, you also had the filing of two lawsuits by Erwin Zalkin. You'll remember we were talking earlier about the legislation that was introduced back in February, the Children Act that was brought into legislation. Erwin Zalkin jumps on that opportunity to immediately file lawsuits for Heather Steele and Michael Ewing, naming the governing body as defendants. So quite a busy August. I don't know which of those stories you guys want to comment on.
Well, I on the one with the parents who withheld blood from their little boy and he dies, or their son, sorry, and he dies. One of the weird thoughts that occurred to me is one of the few things that could possibly make that whole situation more tragic and awful is if at some point in the future those parents wake up.
Yeah.
And can you imagine what that will be like to realize that your child is no longer with you because you believed a nonsensical, contradictory, ever-changing policy, which essentially is based on a complete misunderstanding of Hebrew scripture. It's one of those things where I don't know if it would be kinder for them to never wake up or to wake up. I don't know, but watching that whole thing, it's the relish with which it's promoted. And the Watchtower has done this before, infamously, that magazine cover that they seem to try and now downplay a little bit now when they show all the children who've died from refusing blood. But also now, as has been pointed out, they can never back away from this, because as soon as they say, whoops, we're wrong, you can have blood after all. Even if no one sues them, which you could arguably, people may, I don't know what the legal standing for it would be, but the sense of emotional betrayal from people who, that's not like we've got the date wrong by 1 year on something and we're reconfiguring a date. That's like people are dead because we made a mistake. Similar to the Mexico-Malawi scandal, where people are dead because Watchtower was inconsistent and hypocritical. And so it was just tragic to watch that. And as I've said, just the one thing going through my head was, oh my God, what if they wake up one day? And I just don't, I'm kind of, the whole thing's just heartbreaking, but underlines again why activism needs to happen and why this needs to be brought to the attention of not only Jehovah's Witnesses, but also the wider world, to see, there are people who are dead who shouldn't be because of this cult. Indeed.
And my thoughts kind of reflected in what you said there, Covert. I actually don't think I would think it would be best if the parents don't wake up.
Yeah.
Personally. But yeah, Vin Vega there saying blood guilty in a very literal sense. Again, we knew that this was the teaching. We knew that this was what Jehovah's Witnesses are expected to do. But to have them use their video propaganda machine to promote it and sell it and celebrate it, for me, was just, incredible to see.
I think that there are only a handful of religions in the world that require you to go as far as giving your life for their, there's just very few whose policies would be so invasive and strict that they would cause you to do what Jehovah's Witnesses do when it comes to not only their own personal beliefs about blood, but they would impose that upon their children. And look how many children have died despite, even more would have died without court interventions. I think it lends itself to discussing what we call the sunk cost fallacy, which is that you've put so much into this belief structure, religion, organization, whatever you want to call it, that you've almost gone past the tipping point of, look, if you've lost a child, you have to live your life in a way that justifies what you did. And the very idea of waking up, it's very difficult and persons have done this that have lost family members. And it's just, they have to live with that for the rest of their lives. And I really feel for those individuals, but I think most people, not just with the blood policy, but with so many other things, they've invested so much of their lives into Watchtower's teachings that are so personally invasive in their lives that they don't want to give up. They don't want to give up the things that have made them who they are, because to do so would be an admission that they are wrong. And look, that's a very difficult thing.
Yeah, as I said in a recent video, the minute the first blood has been spilled, you're wedded to that policy, because if you're going to do a U-turn, you've got to take responsibility for it.
It's tough.
So, what can we say about surely this was a big deal. For the first time, not just Watchtower being sued, we've had that before, and it's great to see the organization being held accountable. But for the first time in August, I think it was August 13th, Erwin Zolkin listing the governing body as defendants in his lawsuits that he filed on behalf of Heather Steele and Michael Ewing. That was surely a huge deal.
So those cases, and those aren't the last cases to be filed naming the governing body members, because what the attorneys are really trying to do is that they're trying to make a point that, like the Catholic Church, the Jehovah's Witnesses are responsible from the top down. It's a hierarchical organization, and that these governing body members are indeed responsible for the policies that control and direct the lives of millions of people. And they direct people to break the law. They direct their own elders to break their law, the law. So, you've got to have accountability. Now, we know that in the past 6 or so years, the governing body has taken away the appointing of elders and ministerial servants and pioneers and thrown that upon the circuit overseer as a way of being not accountable for those decisions. And I think they did that for legal reasons. But the reality is that they control and approve of everything. And Erwin Zolkin and other attorneys are trying to make that point. And I'll also say this, that you're looking at those cases filed in August, and there were a lot of them. And many of them were against the Catholic Church as well. A lot was filed on August 14th, 2018. But in the amended complaints, you have the initial complaint, and then what happens usually is within a month or two, you'll have the first amended complaint of a civil trial. They actually named the individual members of the governing body, not just the governing body as a group. And so they are going after these men and trying to hold them accountable. And we know that Erwin has tried to do that in the past. And unfortunately, it was it was successful, except that Watchtower wouldn't turn over Garrett Loesch, for example, in the Lopez trial, where Garrett Loesch wrote and said, I don't work for Watchtower. Watchtower has no control over me. And they believe that they are a spirit anointed body that doesn't even dwell on this earth. They think that they're just a heavenly organization of men that are really bound for the spirit realm, and that they're not responsible, that they don't even have an address here on earth. These are things that are under investigation right now. And it's not just these civil attorneys that are going after them, but we're going to be seeing criminal investigations involving holding the organization responsible at the very highest levels. Because
Mark is talking about things that he knows we can't go into detail on this show. There's so much happening. I mean, people think, in all seriousness, people must think sometimes that we're kind of trying to find these stories, and we're trying to kind of, as it were, scrape the bottom of the barrel to find evidence to pin on Watchtower. The truth is, on this show, we only get to talk about a percentage of what we hear, because there's stuff where we are literally prevented from talking about it. Would that be fair, Mark?
Yes, very much so. Look, we've always been about non-sensationalizing these things, because first of all, the three of us that are on this program right now, we're faithful and loyal Jehovah's Witnesses. They grew up in a witness environment, and we cared about our witness friends, and we don't hate them. In fact, we want to help them. So, I think we're doing it out of a genuine and honest desire to help these people, to create transparency, and to say, look, you can be whatever religion you want, but you need transparency. Because if there's anything I've learned, is that when you give people the facts and show them the documents and show them what goes on behind the scenes, they often have a much different outlook on life and on the organization when they find out what really goes on behind the curtain. And when we pull that curtain back, it's not because we're inventing these stories. There's no Johnny the Bethelite that works for this program. We've got real people that are contacting us from inside.
You've opened a can of worms there, Mark.
Yeah. So right. But I think people need to hear that. I think people do need to hear that these are real people that have either left or are still inside or trapped inside the organization, that are reaching out to us, and we're sharing these stories and the information. It's True.
Monica Owens saying there, I am so interested in how the naming of individual governing body members will play out. They may need to scramble around and find some new light. Well said there, Monica. Now, as we move on to September, there were two significant dates I've written down. The 13th of September, Mark was in Montana attending in what appeared to be some kind of hotel conference suite, Watchtower's appeal of the $35 million jury verdict against them in the previous year's Montana judgment. How would you summarize what happened in that hotel conference suite?
So in 2018, the largest jury verdict in favor of any single child abuse victim ever, I've never seen a larger one, was awarded to Lexi Nunez in the Nunez versus Watchtower case, in which Watchtower told the elders not to report the abuser, Max Reyes, to the authorities, and they were held responsible for that. So, as we expected, Watchtower appealed the decision, and they're basically appealing on they have two arguments. One, they're saying they never got a fair trial. They're saying that the judge made certain rulings just prior to the trial that took place in 2018, and they don't believe that those were fair rulings. And the second is that they're arguing against Montana's cap on civil judgment, punitive damage awards, which I think is $10 million. So what Lexi's attorneys are arguing is that the cap itself is unconstitutional. And so what they've done is they've presented a pretty solid argument. And I don't know how it's going to play out. It could be that the judgment is fully upheld, but that the constitutional cap is upheld also. And the plaintiff may end up with still one of the largest settlements or civil judgments ever in child abuse history, which would be $10 million. So the answer is, so the state of that case is that the Supreme Court justices are still working that out. It takes probably at least until January before we would expect a decision in that case. It could even be longer. They take their time and they evaluate all of the facts. But the reason it happened in a conference room and not a courtroom is that in Montana, it's such a large state. Every year they hold appeals to the Supreme Court in different cities because they have a lot of trial attorneys. So every single trial attorney in the state of Montana got to hear that case and that case only that went up before the Montana Supreme Court this just a few months ago. And I got a chance to talk to a lot of attorneys that were there, that had no idea, that they were just being informed of this case for the very first time. And I think now all of them
have some kind of awards ceremony, and there were people there who were there for some other event, and they sat through the appeal hearing or something like that.
Well, it's the Montana Trial Lawyers Association. So they have a lot of events that take place. Yeah, they might have some awards during the day. They have some speeches that are given. Yeah. There's a lot of things that go on, but this was the premier event. So they brought in all of the Supreme Court justices. I forget if it was 8 or 9 or 10. I have pictures of it. And I sat there with the plaintiff at her table, and the Watchtower's attorneys had one table, and the plaintiff's attorney, Neil Smith, and his team had a table, and they got a chance to present their arguments and rebuttals to the arguments.
What's if you don't mind me asking, because I'm interested, the reason I'm asking this is because of ICSA with the forthcoming hearings. What was how can I put this? What was the attitude like between the plaintiff's attorneys and Watchtower attorneys? Were they, when they were kind of, I don't know, between hearings, was there any kind of banter between them, or any kind of cordial behavior, or was it cold shoulder treatment?
It was very much cold shoulder on the part of Watchtower.
Right.
I can tell you that because Lexi's attorney Neil Smith, I think he's one of the most gregarious, nice guys you'll ever meet. And one thing I've learned about these civil cases, and even in criminal cases too, but civil cases, the attorneys involved are extremely professional. They're they have to be cordial to each other. I saw that in Fessler. I saw that in Montana. And even in the criminal case of Rod Watkins, they have a standard of law and practice that they have to abide to. And you would think they'd be duking it out and hurling insults at one another. But that generally doesn't happen in a courtroom. They have to follow rule of law, and they make their arguments to the judge, and the judge makes a ruling, or in the case of a jury, will make a ruling. But yeah, they like Joel Taylor and those attorneys that were on Watchtower's side, they were not interested at all in.
We will be having, hopefully, we'll be revisiting the Montana case once there's a bit of resolution on that.
Yeah, there's a lot going on.
Let's just press on with the final 4 things on my list, and then we can move to some superlative news reading from Mr. Covert Fade, who, if you're wondering why he's quiet, it's because he's doing some work for MI5 at the moment as we speak. And
you're not supposed to say. You're not supposed to say. We have a breach. We have a security breach.
Yeah. So
dispatch containment teams to Croatia.
So Covert's in the thick of things at the moment, but he will be rejoining us, we hope, for when we get to December. But in September, on the 14th of September, it was the 147th Gilead graduation. Now, I don't know whether you chaps have had any time to look at any of the video footage, but I did feature some of it on my 10 worst videos of 2019, because Mark Sanderson got up on stage and in the very opening comments of the proceedings made some outrageous remarks about higher education, and saying that it was all about self-fulfillment, and saying that it would be a waste of time, for example, to learn about quote-unquote dead languages. That's right, the sorts of languages the Bible was written in. And saying that it would be a waste of time to learn about bacteria. The human body is made up of, I think, 53% bacteria, and insects. And I quoted on my rebuttal video an Awake article talking about how crucial insects are to human life on the planet. So he just made some ridiculous remarks, which, I mean, I can't look at the guy again now without thinking, you're just as stupid as the rest of them now.
Well, presumably he never wants to use any antibiotics then, if there's no point learning about bacteria.
Exactly.
Yeah.
If it's small, if it's tiny in Mark Sanderson's mind, it doesn't matter. Anyway, so that was just astonishing. October the 3rd. Well, first of all, let me mention that in October, I need to quickly try and get the screen share up again, because in October, we had some interesting photographs on Instagram of an exhibit in Sydney. I think it was sorry, not in Sydney. I think this is the Brazil Bethel. And you had pictures emerging on Instagram of witnesses visiting this exhibit. Bear in mind, the exhibits get approved by the headquarters. They don't just throw them up willy-nilly and put up whatever they want. Each exhibit gets approved by, I think, the teaching committee. I could be wrong there, but it's one of the governing body committees that approves these exhibits. And you had these remarkable images of Jehovah's Witnesses pretending to be persecuted for Instagram in a jail cell. So, again, it's one of those moments where you think... It's one of those moments where you think this organization now bears no likeness to the one I remember.
Yeah, this was crazy because there's lots of, it's almost like a fetishization of upcoming persecution. But there's also I almost feel like I'm making a sweeping generalization, so I don't know if this is true, but it's hard to believe any of those witnesses. I mean, can you imagine people who'd once been in Auschwitz going back and posing inside Auschwitz for Instagram to say, oh, I'm going to pose like I was being persecuted? I don't know, there was just something really weird about it, and a kind of a fetishization of, oh, we're all going to be locked up, and I don't know. I'm struggling to articulate what I really mean. I just think it's so bizarre, and it's almost quite insulting to people who really do have to be locked up and undergo political or religious persecution. I mean, I don't know. Maybe they're doing it in solidarity with the Russian brothers and sisters, or with other brothers and sisters on the globe. But it seems to be more being done for a fun thing. I don't know. It's just.
I mean, to treat a jail cell as a photo op, and it's quite clearly
it's really tone deaf. It's really tone deaf.
It's quite clearly been set up as a photo op as well. It's not like it was intended purely for aesthetic purposes. Surely, if there's a way to get in behind, it seems as though Watchtower was almost egging witnesses on to get behind and have their photo taken. I don't know. It's very, very odd.
Well, they love quoting the scripture that says, "You will be objects of persecution," and it's not you might be objects of persecution or subject to persecution. You will be subject to persecution. So there is this persecution complex among Jehovah's Witnesses, and I think they kind of run headlong into it, which is why we see the arrest of these people in so many different countries, Russia and others. I mean, we have this Danish man, Dennis, who is one of Watchtower's poster men now for being loyal to the organization in Russia, being thrown in jail. And in fact, his jail cell, we saw many pictures that look very similar to this jail cell they've recreated in Brazil. And I think some of these people are just honestly emotionally thinking, well, these are my brothers, they're in prison, I should really think about this and reflect on the fact that, they've been loyal to Jehovah. And some people view it that way. But like you said, Lloyd, I mean, this is just a photo op. It's, and they're going to go off, just like the governing body members. I think there is an example. I don't know if it was Mark Sanderson or I think it was Jeffrey Jackson. I've got an audio clip of him saying that he took a trip to Russia and he was, he basically said, they didn't get me. I got out of the country. They didn't get me. And he almost made a joke out of it, but it's not a joke because there are people that have been in prison, for example, in Eritrea for 20 or 30 years or 25 years. And this is not funny. There are people that have been tortured and maimed in Malawi and other African countries and, brutally treated that have had their lives ripped away from them all because maybe they didn't purchase that party card. And I think about things like that. For example, in Malawi, they wouldn't purchase the party card. But every year, as I was growing up, the Kingdom Ministry said, if you're a young man, make sure you register for the selective service regulations. It was in the Kingdom Ministry every single year that when you turned 18, you had to register for the selective service regulation in the United States. So I had to do that, meaning if they had a draft, then you would not go into the military. But they said it's okay to obey Caesar's laws by registering for the draft. And I could sign that paper. But look at these people like in Malawi, they couldn't even just register. I mean, it was just a difference in terminology by the party. It didn't mean anything. It was a one-party state. It was this dictator named Banda ran the country anyway. So it didn't matter if they purchased the political card or not, because they weren't voting for anyone. They were automatically under the control of this dictator who was a dictator for 40 or 50 years in Malawi. So, sorry to go on a rant here, but these people are loyal to something.
It's insensitive, isn't it? The way that this was all set up and indeed jumped on by witnesses who were visiting.
Very true.
Two more things to mention. On October 3rd, that was the date that the most prolific pedophile in the history of Jehovah's Witnesses was convicted in Arkansas.
Who was that, Lloyd? I don't know.
You mentioned him already.
Yeah, I'm just kidding.
Yeah.
Look, I got on a plane, 2 planes, to go to Arkansas, to Heber Springs, Arkansas. And I did mention it already that this man who was he wasn't just an elder for a year. This man was a career elder. And when I say career elder, he was a pioneer elder. His wife was a pioneer. They were the up and coming couple, and they came, and they actually were put into a Kingdom Hall he was a Bethelite. They were both at Bethelites. He was removed or kicked out of Bethel because he admitted to having a homosexual experience with a 20-year-old man in Bethel. At least that's his testimony. And within 3 years, he was appointed as an elder. And I don't know at what point he started molesting children exactly. We're still investigating that. It may have happened before he went to Bethel. It may have happened after. But in Indiana, he started molesting a lot of children. And in the year 2000, Watchtower came out with a policy that said if you're not a special pioneer or a circuit overseer or a visiting missionary, you can't live inside of a Kingdom Hall apartment. So they moved to Arkansas after this Watchtower letter came out in beginning of 2000. By the end of 2000, they had moved to Heber Springs, Arkansas, where he was again, eldership transferred, and he started molesting dozens of children there. The number that we don't even know. The police detective interviewed at least 10 different Jehovah's Witness children. I know there's many more, but he got hold of every child he could, and the molestation took many different forms, from touching of the buttocks all the way up to drugging and raping young boys in the Kingdom Hall apartment in Indiana, for example. So what happened was, when this eventually came out, one of the victims finally told their mother. The mother spoke to the police, not the elders. The elders did not cooperate with the detective. In fact, when the detective called New York, she spoke to one of Watchtower's attorneys, who, by the way, actually gave the name of the detective, because they don't give the names. If an elder calls the legal department, they don't give the name of the lawyer, of Watchtower's lawyer. But if a detective calls, they're required to give the name, but they would not give any information. In fact, they told the detective, "You want information? Subpoena us." They refused to give any information. So as a result, as you mentioned, Lloyd, the case went to trial. And what is particularly disturbing is that they had an incredible amount of evidence against this elder, or former elder, Roderick Watkins. Incredible amount of evidence. So much so that he had no chance. And still, he dragged all of those people through a trial that should have never taken place. They offered him 40 years. Then they offered him 30 years. I was in the air when that offer was still valid. He could have accepted the deal, and had he admitted to his crimes and gone through all of the programs.
Presumably he was being given this offer just to expedite proceedings so that the victims wouldn't be dragged through needless.
Exactly. The district attorney, they were very compassionate to the victims. These are, my God, Lloyd, I can't begin to tell you how horrific it was to sit there and imagine if you were a victim. Some of these victims, many of them, were still minors. They're putting children on the witness stand in front of a large group, members of the congregation, interested people, myself, attorneys, the entire jury, the judge, the court reporters, are all listening to these minors. One of the minors just exploded in hysterics and tears and started hyperventilating. They had to send the jury out of the room. It was horrific to see what this poor girl went through. And they brought the jury back in, and this happened again and again. This man, Roderick Watkins, never admitted his guilt. And as a result, they gave him the maximum possible sentence of 80 years in prison. And by the way, I haven't announced this yet, but so his lawyer has ditched him now.
All right.
Watkins has filed an affidavit of he's indigent, so it's an affidavit of indigency, which
what
means,
on earth does that mean?
It means he's poor, he's broke, he has no more money left. So he spent all of his money. I think that he didn't own property. He had a small amount of money. In fact, I have a copy of the affidavit showing exactly how much money he has, because he had to declare it. And he's got less than $2,000 to his name. His attorney has, who is a criminal defense attorney, who most of whose cases are for people are criminals like this child. He's a criminal defense attorney. Most of, how can I say it? So he's filed this affidavit to say that he has no money because he wants to appeal the case, believe it or not. I mean, look, what did you expect from this man? So he is appealing the case, and
without
now
a lawyer. He's self-representing.
Well, no. So he's applying for a court-appointed attorney.
Oh, right. Okay.
And it could be that they assign the same guy back to him, but the state's going to now pay for it. So now the state, in fact, I just have this. This is just today. This is literally just this morning. This came across the court system. It's an order to transport Roderick Watkins. So he's currently in the Tucker unit of the Department of Corrections of Arkansas, in Tucker, Arkansas. So there is an order to transport him on January 2nd, this week, January 2nd, to transport him to the Cleburne County Sheriff's Office for a court appearance. So this is what it looks like is going on, is that he's being transferred for a court appearance so that he can continue his appeal using a court-appointed attorney, assuming that they accept his affidavit of indigency. And so meanwhile, these poor people are going to be, he's putting these people through this.
So the victims are going to have to appear at the appeal hearing.
No, that I don't think they have to. I think he's just going to appear before the judge. So that would only happen is if he got a court-appointed lawyer and they were able to prove that there was a mistrial or something happened, and I mean, technically it could go back to trial again, but I really don't see that happening. I think this man's not going to ever see the light of day again.
He's just deluded, isn't he? And also seems to get perverted pleasure out of the control that he can have over his victims by dragging them through the ordeal in court, by the sounds of things. A very, very nasty piece of work. Technically,
he could have been out in 6 years. If he admitted his crimes, said, I have a problem, he could have gotten 1/6 of a 30-year sentence, which was valid up until 4:30 p.m. The day I was in the air flying to Arkansas, which is the day before the trial. And like I said, he could have been out in 6 years, which is why they gave him 80 years, because the prosecution argued that technically he could be out in 1/6 of that time. But I think we all know that he is not going to admit to his crimes. And by the way, we haven't heard enough of this case, because the civil cases are surely going to come out of this case because of Watchtower's cover up. And they're going to be scrambling for years with a case like this.
Well, thanks for summarizing that for us, Mark. We have had a couple of super chats through. One from Brian Cooper, who says, I've lost my mother, a best friend, nearly lost my newborn nephew, if not for the courts, and one other JW from another Congo, all for the blood issue. Yet I'm told by Jehovah's Witnesses the blood issue is a rarity. It is disgraceful, the damage that teaching alone has done, and goodness knows, Brian, what the body count is. And that's one thing that Watchtower isn't quite brave enough to share with us, just how many pay the ultimate price. So very sorry to hear that you've gone through that, and thank you for your support for the channel. The next super chat actually relates to the final thing I had on my list, which was it's referring to something that happened on November the 8th, 2019. If you were working at Warwick on November 8th, 2019, and cared to glance out of the window towards the lake, you would have seen a very small aluminium kayak bobbing up and down on the lake, on the waters of Sterling Forest Lake, containing yours truly and Javier Ortiz. And we managed to get right up to the buildings with our signs. We were doing filming for the Truth About the Truth documentary, and our protest was our attempt at getting the message across, having been refused an interview. And inside the buildings, as we were doing this, as we were making this protest out on the lake, was a Jehovah's Witness PIMO who was on a tour and was able to confirm that witnesses were being kept away from the windows. So Warwick went into shutdown mode, and witnesses who were there for tours were shepherded away from the window so that they couldn't see myself and Javier out on the lake holding a sign saying "We love Jehovah's Witnesses." MT says, "Hey Lloyd, this is the PIMO who was at headquarters in Warwick when you and Javier were about to storm the castle. I am now POMO and waiting to see if judicial action will be taken against me. Thanks for all you guys do." Wow.
So fantastic.
Even someone who was inside and again involved in the organization, their personal journey has advanced even since then to the point where they're able to say, "I'm physically out." So congratulations.
Welcome to freedom, MT.
Indeed. Enjoy your freedom as we end the year. You can certainly close that chapter of your life and look forward to a life of freedom. So congratulations. That's a really lovely, touching account to include. And JP, if I can include his comment, he says everyone should be POMO. I think we would agree with you there. Now,
587. I love it.
One thing that we should all do right now is listen to some newscasting genius in the form of the golden tones of Covert Fade as he introduces the news.
And cue the music, which
can't cue the music, though, can you? Because it's a live stream.
Yeah. Hang on.
I haven't yet figured out how to do that.
I don't know. That's my random jingle. So I've got three quick stories queued up here, and this is going to be an interesting experiment because I'm going to switch browser tabs, and I'm assuming you won't lose my audio if I do this. But if I suddenly vanish, we know this isn't going to work. But hang on. So
no, you can do it.
Can you still hear me?
You haven't been taken out by Russian ops.
Yeah, you're fine.
Not yet. No, KGB is still tracking me. So first of all, there's a couple of news items I just want to bring up that are related. It's continuing this theme of child abuse. And I think it's important to keep this in the news because this is rapidly becoming one of the things that is most disturbing about the Jehovah's Witnesses is their cover-up of this. But also it's having this ripple effect of the fact that it's exposing how duplicitous the organization is, the way it will lie to the courts, the way it will refuse to cooperate with police authorities. So it really is one of the most significant things going on. Laura Waring, this is reported by the Belfast Telegraph and various other news outlets in Ireland. There's a abuse survivor known as Laura Waring has actually said that she thinks the Jehovah's Witnesses need to be investigated because of the way they handle child abuse. Her abuser was a man known as Charles Frederick Loyal. He's been sentenced to 18 counts of abuse against Laura. And in the news reports, she basically talks about how this was not at first admitted. I'm just going through the thing here. So the abuse took place at numerous locations, including church meetings, where this man would hold Bible classes. Although he did not hold it. Interestingly, it says he doesn't hold a position inside the church. So presumably, I don't know what that means, but presumably he was a witness who was entrusted with some kind of responsibility by the congregation. Mark might know more about this than me. So I might hand over
can. Yeah, go right ahead. Go right ahead, Covert. Yeah, I know Laura fairly well. She's a wonderful woman. She's been through a lot. This man abused her for a long time, and finally she was able to speak to the criminal authorities. So I just want to emphasize this is a criminal case where this man was arrested and then released so that he could stand trial, and he was found guilty. I have to check my notes because I am working on a story on her, but I don't even remember off the top of my head. I think he was a ministerial servant. And I can double check that while you're discussing some of the other news. But I think the important thing here is that the takeaway is that he was, regardless of the fact that he's not going to prison, he was found guilty. And unlike Watkins, he broke down and admitted to what he did. And that was actually part of the reason. There were several reasons that gave him some leniency. He's an old man, not in very good health. He's admitted to his crimes. There were just a lot of reasons that the court used to put together the fact that he's on I don't know if suspended sentence, or I forget how it's worded in the article there, but he was found guilty. So this man is going to be forever labeled as a person who molested one or more children. And I think it's important that Laura is vindicated. And I think kind of Lloyd alluded to this earlier when he said that a lot of these individuals are not looking for money. They're not suing Watchtower just to, get millions of dollars. That's not really the point of it. It's to get that apology. It's to change policies, to get that apology and change policies in the organization.
Having said that, I will say this about the UK, and that's that there's a big problem in the UK when it comes to the sentences that people receive for child abuse. I mean, you were talking before about Rod Watkins getting 80 years. That would be unheard of in the UK. For some reason, they hand down, even when they do send pedophiles to prison, it's for quite short periods of time. I can't think of any examples off the top of my head, but when I have heard stories about pedophiles being sentenced, you look at the time period that they've been sentenced for and you think, how on earth is that commensurate with what they've done? So I just want to add that caveat that there is a bit of a problem in the UK with pedophiles not getting quite enough prison.
Lloyd,
do you think of all the general public would expect that kind of crime to be one of the most heavily punished crimes on books? It's very strange.
Do you feel that is in any way related to why there's no clergy mandated reporting yet in the UK?
I would guess that's a separate issue, because I don't think it's just pedophilia where people, I wouldn't say get let off the hook too easily, but the sentencing is very, very lenient in a number of areas. The lack of mandatory reporting is, I would suggest, a separate issue. But it's good to see that, at least in terms of mandatory reporting, there's scrutiny of that, and I know that it's something that ICSA are looking at. So whether there's going to be reforms in the future also looking at sentencing, I don't know. But when I heard this story about Laura, and I don't know, I'm not fully convinced that it was the correct thing to just let this guy off the hook, regardless of his age, regardless of how remorseful he was.
Yeah, I agree.
See some time behind bars, I'm afraid.
Right.
Yeah, and continuing on, there's a second case that's been recently in the news. And again, I think this is, if you'd have told me 5 years ago that there'd be so many cases of JW child abusers in the news that we wouldn't be able to keep track of them all, I'd have thought you were lying to me. But it's got so epidemic now that we actually struggle to keep on top of all the new revelations. But this is a story in the Chicago Tribune about a man in Crystal Lake, a man named Arturo Hernandez Pedraza, who has been found guilty of multiple crimes against a young victim. Now, this took place over 13 years. Some of the details are pretty horrific. He threatened to kill her mum, and her brother if she told anyone of the assaults. He blamed her for what she was doing. But critically enough, the young woman testified that once she told her mother of the abuse when she was 6, and that the elders of the church were informed. However, the allegations were not reported to the police at that time. She said the abuse stopped for a short time, but began again. In other words, it sounds like the elders had a word with the guy and thought they'd put an end to it. And then the police were never informed. And as is so often the case, the whole thing kicks off again. Obviously, this man has now been arrested. He's been convicted. But I think this is just, it's worth, because in the face of so many denials from Watchtower that their procedure is a problem, I think it's just worth highlighting again and again and again. We see in these reports that even when the elders are contacted, they didn't go to the police, and then whatever their method of handling it was, it didn't work, because the abuser started to abuse again, and because we know that this is something abusers will do. And sadly, the only thing that really stops the abuse is authorities getting involved and a jail cell and a continuing program of monitoring and, a behavioral correction from society, which is something the elders simply can't do. So I think it's just worth highlighting, we've got yet another case to show again that the organization didn't handle the thing properly. And if the instruction to the elders had been report this to the police when it was first reported, then there'd be many years of abuse that this victim hadn't have had to suffer. So, yeah.
Yeah. Again, right. This whole idea in this one, let's see, you were reading the Chicago Tribune article. I'm not sure if it was phrased the same way, but there's quite a few articles on this. This is a man that was convicted right outside of Chicago, was at Crystal Lake. So he, one of the other papers, the Herald, the Northwest Herald, describes the elders' lack of cooperation here as well. And I'm looking for the sentence where it states, their lack of cooperation. Let's see. Shortly after, church leaders warned parishioners not to leave their children alone with Hernandez Pedraza. The accusations weren't reported until 2018. However, when the victim told church elders the abuse hadn't stopped, the prosecutor said. And I think there were some other indications here of the lack of cooperation from the church elders. And one of the statements that was made here was, again, what the elders are trying to do is state that they have clergy confidential privilege, and that's why they did not want to cooperate with law enforcement when it came to releasing. They have all of these files that they keep in the congregation records in the filing cabinet, and when the police come calling, they immediately call Watchtower's legal department, and the legal department says, don't give them anything unless they come to you with a subpoena and threaten to break down that door. Don't give them anything. Whereas you would think any other organization that has an individual who, let's say, works for them, maybe it's not even a religion, just an organization, and you have information about allegations, maybe it's sexual assault, whatever happened, and your human resources department had these allegations, well, they would immediately turn them over to law enforcement and cooperate with them. But when you're a religion, it's different. They have these constitutional rights, they believe, that are protecting them. And this is coming to a head here in the United States in particular. And I think once we resolve these issues with their supposed constitutional rights, then we're going to see that start to play out in other countries where, because these are issues in Canada and other countries as well, where the religious freedoms often trump the rights of the individual.
Yeah. So I thought we just finally, for the last item, we'd turn on something a bit more upbeat, because there's one of the fantastic things about the XJW community that's really blossomed, I think, over the last few years is the XJW Reddit.
Indeed.
Because the wonderful thing about being online is, especially if you're maybe physically and mentally out, or you've just left but you don't know any other former Jehovah's Witnesses, the XJW Reddit, which for anyone who hasn't used it yet is literally reddit.com/XJW, is this thriving online community of former Jehovah's Witnesses from all over the world, physically and mentally out, or physically out, mentally out, or in various stages of transition from one to another. And it's, you know, it's a place where people can gather to talk. They can talk about Watchtower things, about developments, or they can just share little anecdotes of what it was like when they were in, or resources they found to help them. Well, the growth of this community has been absolutely fantastic. As we stand now at the end of 2019, there are, and this is in terms of registered users, all right? So this isn't including maybe the many physically and mentally out JWs who view the site but don't want to create an account. 45,000 users.
Brilliant.
On that Reddit. That is incredible. Guys, what are your thoughts on the XJW Reddit and the service it provides to the community?
I actually think, I don't know what Mark thinks, but I can just think back to when I first took my tentative steps into the whole world of apostate forums and that kind of thing. And there was a forum that people still refer to as JWN. And that was my landing zone, so to speak, in terms of figuring out that I wasn't alone and being able to anonymously interact. And I think that's crucial, being able to interact without divulging who you are, because there's a thriving community on Facebook. But even though people obviously set up anonymous accounts on Facebook, number one, Facebook frowns on that. And number two, I don't know, people are quite intimidated by Facebook, I think, for justifiable reasons. Whereas when you have a forum where you can just basically lurk without any expectations to basically do or say anything or divulge who you are, that for me is the perfect kind of catchment zone for people to kind of again realize, look, I'm not alone. And I think that the XJW subreddit has really cornered the market in that area, because it's not only a place full of people who are welcoming and warm and allowing people to vent and allowing people to take those first tentative steps and get advice. It's also, as far as I'm concerned, very well moderated. So they take a responsible attitude towards making sure that it's a welcoming environment. So I'm thrilled that they've had so much success, and I hope their success continues.
I'd like to shout out to the XJW Reddit, because it's been a very effective tool in not only the reasons that you've stated, Lloyd, in helping people that are in the process of maybe they're a PMO, they're waking up, and for the very first time, they're realizing that they're not alone. And for me, I didn't even know about Reddit when I left 5 or 6 years ago. It was, in fact, you recommended to me to try out the XJW Recovery Group 3. And at the time that had it ended up with more than 10,000 members. And that was a great spot at the time for being able to see that my experience was not unique, that other people had the same experience. I'm not crazy. These things didn't just happen to me, but they happened to a lot of people. So it was much later, after I got involved in activism and some writing and working with survey, that I discovered the XJW Reddit. And it's a little bit different forum. It's not as easy to navigate maybe as a Facebook group, but once you're in it, it's a much more powerful tool. And I will say that, we know Watchtower monitors that, because we saw what happened with Dark Spilver. In fact, Watchtower mentioned the membership of XJW Reddit in the Dark Spilver case as their evidence that, they're doing just fine. Their freedom of speech is protected because look how many members they have. That was what Watchtower said. But I want to give a shout out to those guys. As you said, it's very well moderated. But it also has helped in criminal investigations, including the investigation of Rod Watkins. And I got information from lots of sources on Watkins, and a lot of it I haven't even reported on yet. But XJW Reddit was critical in reaching out to anyone that knew about Rod Watkins, and I got a very solid, healthy response, because we know the JW community is a fairly tight-knit community. So people that were in Indiana and Arkansas and other states, including where he's from in North Carolina, reached out to me through Reddit. And I got a massive amount of information just by reaching out and asking questions, and people were very forthcoming. So I just want to say thanks to all of the people. Some of the people that run Reddit are PMOs. They're still going to meetings and they're fully awake, but they are engaged in this community and helping moderate it. And it helped put a man in prison for 80 years. And they're very responsive to media requests as well. If the media is looking for help in JW cases or looking for information, they are very willing to pin a post from a legitimate media organization or somebody who's respected in the community. So thanks to those guys.
Lou Knight saying XJW subreddit has been a great resource for leaks, including the last 2 versions of the Shepherd book, countless letters to the bodies of elders, etc. And who's done it saying XJW Reddit member here. It's a great forum. So was that all you had for us, Covert?
That's everything for December. We're I guess it's been a relatively quiet Christmas. So yeah.
It has. But as we approach the 3-hour mark, I'm sorry, guys, I didn't expect it to go on this long.
This is almost a Lord of the Rings film, this, isn't it?
Can anyone remember life before this live stream started? It's just kind of this hazy memory.
Hey, this is Joe Rogan-esque. So
indeed. But hey, in fairness, we've been condensing 12 months into this 3 hours. So
it's not easy.
Cut us some slack, folks. And also, there's still over 600 watching. So clearly it's at least remotely watchable. But I did want to just conclude by looking forward to 2020. So shall I give you what I'm looking forward to? And then you guys can pitch in if there's something I've forgotten or if there's something that you're looking forward to.
I will allow it.
Yeah.
So in January in particular, I'm looking forward to the findings or the report of the Dutch investigation by Utrecht University into child sex abuse, which we are expecting to be published in January. So obviously we're keeping close tabs on that at JW Survey and indeed for Watchtower in Focus. So we could indeed be doing an episode on that. I've heard it's going to be January. Maybe it'll be later. I don't know. But that's what I've heard. There is still no... I don't know whether you've noticed this, guys. There still isn't a 2019 service report, which I find fascinating.
Check your message, Lloyd.
Oh, is it been released finally?
I've got it.
Oh, you've got it. Is it been
ready?
To you? Or is it, no, hang on a minute. Has this actually been published on the website, or has it been leaked to you?
No, I think this is just hot off the press here.
Could you do a screen share? Is it shareable?
Yeah, give me just a second here, and you're gonna love this.
Wow,
so,
that's so nice of Watchtower to release it in time for us doing this. They must be listening. We haven't released it yet.
I was literally going to go into full-on bitch mode that they haven't released it yet. And here you are saying, okay.
Go ahead.
Just before you show it, I also just want to quickly mention, look out for a TV series on Jehovah's Witnesses and child sex abuse in January. That's all I'm going to say. So let's look at this service reports.
All right. Yeah, let me get this up. Actually, bear with me just a second here so I can get it up in Adobe, because it is an official PDF, and you'll hear it here first.
I want you guys
percentage.
Show me the percentage.
So while I'm pulling this up, I want you guys to take some bets on how many anointed.
I don't care about the anointed. I want to know whether it's 1.4% or less or more.
Oh, I care. It's I love it. It's just great. Here, let me get this up in Adobe, and then we'll do a screen share here.
Everyone's anointed. That's what it says in there, right? That's how they're getting around this problem.
All right, 20,526 are going to heaven.
What was it?
Boring. Show me the percentage.
All right. I got to find my way back to the StreamYard here, and let's do a screen share. All right. Give me a second. Let's see.
I can't handle this suspense, Mark. You do this to me every time.
I know. We haven't done a screen
So
share in a while.
Last year? What was the percentage last year?
1.4% for the last 2 years.
Okay. Ooh.
So 1.4% for 2018, 1.4% for 2017. Has it gone up? Has it gone down? Mark has the keys to the kingdom, and he's keeping them from us.
Tell me when you can see it.
It's coming up. Hang on a second. I think I have to approve it. Add to stream. All right. Can you zoom in for us, please, Mark? Because viewers don't understand this, but Mark has an unnaturally wide monitor, which we're seeing there.
All right.
Show me the percent. 1.3. It's gone down. Brilliant. So they are even more stagnant than they have been for 2017, 1.4%, 2018, 1.4%, 2019. What's the impact of JW Broadcasting? What's the impact of cart witnessing? What's the impact of all these amazing initiatives? 1.3%.
Clearly, Jehovah is speeding up the slowing down of the work in the time of the end.
Are you guys seeing the whole thing? Bear with me a second here, because I'm not seeing exactly what you're seeing.
It's your abnormal monitor, mate. It really is. I think, goodness knows, I have actually been in your office and I was amazed at how wide it was.
Oh, so we've lost the report, have we?
Yeah, I think we're looking at your tax return now.
That's another court case. So I think what I did was I pulled this off. All right, give me a second here. Let me stop sharing and I'm going to reshare, because it fell off of that window and it went to a court case. So let's do share screen, and then I've got to select the application window.
I'm really pleased about that, though, because it's just, as far as I'm concerned, it's just further stagnation. And they were jumping up and down about the baptisms as well. 303,000 baptisms. But I'd be interested to know how the average compares. So it's one thing to boast about your baptisms, but how many people are leaving? And it's only when I have the chance to take these figures and compare them with previous years, I'm going to know how many people roughly have been leaving, you know?
Yeah.
And how do the average numbers and peak numbers stack up to the previous year? Because if it's only increased by 1.3%, then you could argue more people are leaving.
Which, that would be... I mean, the other thing is, anytime they talk on JW Broadcasting about the wonderful growth of the organization, I think they should be obligated to flash up that percentage underneath. But yeah, that's the interesting thing, isn't it, Lloyd? It's like you can start to work out either they're not baptizing anyone, or you'll be able to actually work out the ratio of what they're actually losing. Which are, as you said, I mean, JW Broadcasting, cart witnessing, all of these innovations and these new things they're trying, and it clearly isn't working. If anything, it's, at best, it's merely slowing the leak down. It's,
It looks like a 2% decrease in the United Kingdom. I'm looking at a little
Seriously?
Chat. Yes.
2% decrease for the UK.
Yeah, I've got a chat going with another group here, and they're examining
fantastic
statistics here.
I'm really pleased. It's not just because I'm British. Obviously, Covert's British too. It's because that would indicate that the rot that I was talking about a year ago, I did a summary of the 2018 service report, in which I figured out that nearly half of Europe was in decline. Britain was one of the few countries that was just kind of on a knife edge, and it looks like they've finally collapsed into this kind of wave of red that's sweeping east to west across Europe, where European Jehovah's Witnesses are saying, screw this, we are done being manipulated and exploited and taken for granted, and we quite honestly prefer to think for ourselves. So it's nice to see that in developing countries where people have access to information, have access to Watchtower in Focus, have access to JW Facts, people are starting to vote with their feet, and it's starting to show. Yes, maybe it's not showing yet in the heartland in America or in, say, South American countries, but in countries in Europe, there's a rot, and it's spreading, as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, let me see if I can get up to some of these countries here, because it looks like there's decreases in other countries, and it looks like the U.S. is stagnant. So I think it's interesting that no increase is actually a decrease.
Can you show me what's Australia?
All right. Let's see, are we up on screen with Australia?
Yeah, you're on screen. It's just a bit small for me.
All right, let's bring it up here.
Zoom us in.
All right, how's that?
That's better. Australia is they've not published the percentage, so that must be around 0, which is fantastic. It could be, hang on, 2019. Yeah, it's just difficult to read it from here.
So I think let's see, it should say at the bottom here.
I'd have to compare the figures. What is Germany a minus? Sorry, viewers, if this is at all tedious. I'm genuinely interested.
I think the viewers are genuinely interested, which is why they're watching.
Germany is also not published, so that could also be either a 0 or a minus.
It's a 0. Yeah, we're a minus.
Yeah.
It's stagnant.
That's wonderful.
And
that's
I want to give a shout out to Jason Wynn for sending me the link, and
thank you, Jason.
Some of the information here. We've got a lot of people watching. So, okay. So Jason is sending me a message here for Botswana, a reduction of 65 peak publishers between 2018 and 2019, minus 0.2% increase. Massive reduction in Britain of 2,316.
Oh, wonderful.
Between peak publishers in 2018 and 2019. That's
2,000 have said, bye-bye, yes. We're out of here. No more exploitation.
It's a 1.9% and 1.97% decrease.
I like this message from Arthur. The US has increased by 30,000 publishers. I mean, bear in mind, the US is supposed to account for 1 million. And in 1 year, they've managed 30,000 as their increase. So it's really nothing to write home about, is it? For the heartland of the religion,
it really is a decrease, because you're talking about so many children are getting baptized that when you wipe out all of those children that are getting baptized, you really have a much larger negative value.
And you also, it's all the places where the money is. And so this is the other thing: the organization's losing ground in the places where it can harvest the most money, and simultaneously being squeezed financially in other areas. And it's not, you know, the decrease this year isn't going to financially cripple them, but it is part of this ongoing decline from where they were. I mean, we sort of talk about some of the golden age of Watchtower as well in the past. And now I think it really is just a question of how fast is the decline going to be rather than anything else.
Any other figures that stand out for you there, Mark? I'm bringing it up on the on my own viewer now.
Sure. Just going to bring this down the screen here. Maybe we can have some comments from.
So I'm also getting kind of zeros or negatives for Austria and Belgium. We were talking about European countries. Bosnia is -3. That's just to the south of where I am. What's Croatia? Please be minus. Come on, Croatia. Yes, Croatia is again minus. Croatia's been minus for ages.
If it got up, you really aren't doing your job if Croatia's gone up in there.
I'd be ashamed. I would take it very personally. Czech Republic, nothing. Denmark, nothing. Estonia, nothing. They really are struggling in Europe. France has managed just 1% increase.
I'm seeing a lot of minuses here.
Any that jump out for you there? Hungary -1.
Oh, yes. Well, Tinian. I mean, everybody's been concerned about Tinian. 14% down.
Latvia -2. Lithuania -2. Again, really struggling, particularly in Eastern Europe. Eastern Europe seems to be the kind of ground zero for witnesses really saying enough of this nonsense, and it's just kind of spreading as far as I can tell from east to west.
Yeah, so it looks like they're saying overall a 1.3% increase from last year. So that's from, and actually let's take a look at what these column figures are. So on the left you have let's see, 2019 peak publishers and then 2019 average publishers. Oh, those are both for 2019.
Also, they're now publishing the average publishers again for each country because they stopped doing that for a while.
Yeah, let me jump back up here to the top if you can see that. And so, right, we've got, so they are showing percentage of increase over 2018, but right, you've got 2019 peak and 2019 average.
Poland is still in -1 for Poland, -1 for Romania. Arthur will be happy about that. So
I think you must be responsible for at least half of the losses in the UK.
Nothing for Serbia, -1 for Slovakia, -1 for Slovenia. Again, it's almost east to west because for Spain they've managed 2. For France, again, they managed 1. Switzerland's managed 1. Nothing for Sweden. It is almost an east to west thing. Ukraine -2. And yeah, you're right. United States stagnant, going nowhere because they only managed 30,000 extra. It's really encouraging, isn't it? I'm really happy about this.
Yeah, and I suppose it brings up the debate of how long is it going to be before they start fiddling the figures?
Well, you could argue that we're already in that because, frankly, I mean, I've made videos about theocratic warfare and about Watchtower's willingness to lie when it suits them. Given all of the other ways in which they are deceiving witnesses, you could argue that we're maybe already in that territory. But even so, if only for argument's sake, I find these numbers important to talk about, because even if they've been cooking the books for a while and actually these numbers are greatly exaggerated, sooner or later you're going to reach a critical point where you're going to have to start dropping the numbers anyway, you know?
Yeah.
And what we're seeing here is figures that have been on 1.4% 2017, 1.4% 2018, 2019, 1.3%. They simply cannot get any buoyancy in these figures. They would argue the love of the greater number has cooled off. This just shows how deep into Satan's system of things we are, when the truth of the matter is people are just tired of being lied to and manipulated, and they're finding it out thanks to the internet, and they're voting with their feet. So it's encouraging for me as an activist, as I'm sure it is for you guys as well. We care deeply about the work that we do, which is why we do these Watchtower in Focus episodes. We're not just interested in talking for the sake of it. We want to make a difference. And it's encouraging to know that collectively the work that activists are doing is having an impact. And so, I haven't had time to drill down these numbers yet. I'm certainly going to do that. I'll probably do that in a video next month. But this is a really encouraging way to conclude our review of 2019, and seeing that it's not just a case of negative and embarrassing stories in terms of lawsuits and what have you. It's also the simple fact that Watchtower is hurting in their numbers.
Yeah, you know, there's a decentralization that's taken place too. We know that within the past few years, a lot of branches closed down, and they've placed those branches under the direction of larger branches. So, for example, you don't have a Norway branch anymore, right? You have it under the direction of the Denmark branch. And the same kind of thing happened in South America, where they shut down a lot of these smaller branches. So at one time, particularly in the 80s and 90s, the 80s was an important time for me because I was baptized in 84 and everything was growing, and they were just buying loads and loads of properties in Brooklyn, just expanding like crazy. And they were doing so in other countries, and they kept spinning it that every time they opened a new branch or expanded or had a new peak in publishers, they said, this is evidence of Jehovah's blessing, that this is a perfect sign that God is blessing this organization. Therefore, you have the expansion. So suddenly we have branches being shut down. We have branches being consolidated. We have, every single town, every witness or ex-witness I've spoken to in every city around the U.S. and other countries has experienced this including my own mother's congregation, was wiped out, was incorporated into another congregation. And they have, really, they've really gotten rid of a number of kingdom halls and a lot of congregations, and they're trying to, amazingly, they're trying to spin it as expansion when it's contraction. It's not expansion. And you can only lie to people for so long before they eventually look at the numbers and figure it out. And I know they're going to do it again this year. They're going to say, look at these numbers. Overall, it's evidence of Jehovah's blessing. But what if they keep going down and down and down? Well, look, I don't think this organization is going to disappear in our lifetime. And I think it's like the Bible students, the Russellites and other groups. It's going to stick around for 100 years. But if you can inoculate mankind, if you can inoculate humans to cult-like influences, and you can free them from the clutches of shunning and of the blood policy and of the child abuse policies, then we can say we've done our job. We've freed them from, the indoctrination of this organization, and then they can go and believe whatever they want to believe in peace.
Arthur's saying that we reported wrong. He's saying the US has only 3,000 extra. Can we confirm that? That would be pretty horrendous.
US or UK? Well, let's go back to the United States.
I think this needs to be confirmed. You see, either Arthur is right and we get to celebrate the US only growing by 3,000 in 12 months, or Arthur is wrong and I get the satisfaction of rubbing his nose in it because he's wrong. So it's a win-win for me.
Do you have last year's report, Lloyd?
Crumbs.
So here's
jw.org 2018 service year. This would be the icing on the cake if it's true. Yeah. Good grief. Country and territory reports. I've got the 2018 figures, and if we're going off peak publishers for the United States of America, it was 1,234,877.
Peak.
Right.
So this right here on the left is peak publishers.
What's the peak for 2019? I'm not looking at it right now.
1,237,054.
Yeah, he's right. It's only 3,000.
So either they had absolutely no success preaching, or there's a heck of a lot of people who
I was jumping up and down about it being 30,000. It was 3,000. That's not even a convention that they've grown by in the heartland of the religion. That no wonder it's taken them this long to release the service report. They were crowing about 300,000 baptisms. Oh, we've reached 300,000 baptisms weeks ago. No wonder it's taken them so long to release this service year report. If hidden in these figures, and it's taken us a few minutes to notice it, the United States in 12 months only grew by 3,000. And that was kids being baptized into the religion. And that's as much as they can. Honestly, that is amazing news.
Yeah, it's not just blank. It's not just zero. That's in reality, it's a negative increase.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Those are shocking figures.
Yeah.
Way to end. Brothers and sisters, welcome to JW Broadcasting. Driving people out at it for not.
Well, that's the beauty. That's the sweet irony is they're telling witnesses that it's never been better in terms of all of the spiritual provisions that are being made available, and this is the result. This is the net result after how many years? 5 years of JW Broadcasting. The organization in the heartland is on its knees.
All right. Well, I'm going to take you one step further. So let's do the 2017, And let's see, 2017 grand totals. Let me see if I can pull that chart.
That's a good point from Jason, actually.
Yeah, 3,000 children. Yeah. Arthur is properly trolling us at this point. He's saying it's not 3,000, it's 2,183. Wow.
The news just gets better and better.
Yeah, it's plummeting as we speak. Stick around a while and it'll be in the negatives. Good grief.
So what do we have here? So the United States, 1 million. This is 2017. I think this is Peak Publishers. 1,232,293. 1,232,293. Yeah, so let's...
It has actually gone down. He's now saying 2,000. Arthur, you're just winding us up at this point. We get it, 3,000. Let's just stay at 3,000. Gosh. Well, that's a really good positive to end on. And we must end, chaps, because we've been prattling on for 3 hours, 10 minutes now. And although there are, even now, 642 watching, so clearly we must have been saying something interesting. Come on, guys. It's nearly New Year's Eve. Let's go to our families. If we don't have families, let's randomly hug someone, and let's just end on a positive. And seriously, because I understand, especially with the whole issue surrounding leaving a group like Jehovah's Witnesses, I am under no illusions that there will be some watching this who are on their own for some reason, or who feel alone, or who feel anxious or low or depressed or fearful due to what Watchtower has been doing in their lives. And I think I speak for the Watchtower in Focus team in saying that you're not alone. We're here for you. And freedom really is worth it. Freedom from the control, the fear, the manipulation. And how encouraging to know that slowly but surely the penny is dropping. If even in the heartland of this obnoxious religion, they can only muster 3,000 over 12 months. So there's some good news to end the year on. And I would like to, on behalf of the whole team, wish all of our viewers, all of the subscribers to the John Cedars channel, and all those who enjoy and appreciate the articles on JW Survey, the whole team would like to wish you a very Merry Christmas and a happy and prosperous 2020. Hopefully I'm speaking for you guys as well.
You are. Thanks, Lloyd. Absolutely. And a Happy New Year and Merry Christmas to everyone.
Happy New Year, guys, and may the new year bring you every joy and happiness.
Thanks so much to all of you, and thanks so much as well for the live chats. They really are appreciated. Just one come through now from Jacob Kreitz. So thank you for that, Jacob. But seriously, everyone, do have a most happy and prosperous 2020. And we'll be churning out more episodes, no doubt, as the year progresses. But that's about all we have for you. Don't forget to subscribe to the John Cedars channel for more such videos. And as always, thank you for watching.